The dress was ugly. Mara Ellison knew it the moment she buttoned the last clasp, standing alone in the narrow room above the millinery shop where she rented space to sleep. The fabric, a dull pewter cotton she'd salvaged from Mrs. Garrison's cast-offs, hung limp against her frame. No bustle, no trim. The neckline sat too high, the sleeves too plain. It looked exactly like what it was, the dress of a woman who couldn't afford to care. She pressed her palms flat against the material, smoothing invisible wrinkles, and stared at her reflection in the small, warped mirror propped against the wall. Pale skin, dark circles under gray eyes that had forgotten how to expect anything good. Hair pulled back so severely it made her cheekbones sharp as glass. "You don't have to go," she whispered to herself. But she did. The harvest ball wasn't optional in Blackridge. It was the social calendar, the yearly ritual where the town's structure was reaffirmed. Who mattered, who didn't, who had risen, who had fallen. Missing it was noticed. Being noticed for the wrong reasons was worse. Mara descended the narrow staircase, careful not to wake Mrs. Talbot, the milliner who tolerated her presence in exchange for unpaid sewing repairs. The September night was cool, the kind that promised frost by morning. She wrapped a thin shawl around her shoulders and walked the 6 blocks to the community hall, her shoes clicking softly against the dirt road. Music and laughter spilled from the open doors. Lanterns hung from the rafters inside, casting warm gold across polished wood floors and tables draped in white cloth. The women wore silk and satin, their hair curled and pinned with jeweled combs. The men stood in clusters, boots shined, vests buttoned over pressed shirts. Everyone belonged to something: families, businesses, land, legacy. Mara belonged to thread and needles and the small corner of invisibility she'd carved out for herself. She slipped inside, keeping to the wall. A few heads turned, most didn't. She was known, the seamstress who could fix a torn hem or take in a waistline, but she wasn't seen. Not really. She was functional, useful when needed, forgotten when not. "Well, look who showed up." The voice cut through the noise like a blade. Mara turned to see Constance Reeve approaching, flanked by 2 other women, Margaret Holt and Iris Langford. All 3 wore expressions that didn't match their smiles. "Miss Ellison," Constance said, her tone sweet as poison. "How brave of you to come." Mara's throat tightened. "Good evening, Mrs. Reeve." Constance's gaze swept over Mara's dress, slow and deliberate. "Did you make that yourself?" "I did." "How resourceful." Constance's smile widened. "You really can make something out of nothing, can't you?" Margaret laughed, a short, sharp sound. Iris covered her mouth, pretending to cough. Mara's fingers curled into the fabric of her skirt. "Excuse me." She turned, but Constance's voice followed her. "Don't wander too far, dear. The dancing will start soon. I'm sure someone will need a hem repaired." More laughter. Scattered, casual, cutting. Mara moved deeper into the hall, past the refreshment table where punch bowls gleamed under lamplight, past the groups of young women clutching dance cards tied with ribbon, past the older men discussing cattle prices and railway expansion. She found an empty chair near the back corner and sat, folding her hands in her lap, willing herself to disappear. The music started. A waltz. Couples moved onto the floor, husbands and wives, courting pairs, fathers dancing with daughters. The room swirled with color and motion, a choreographed display of social harmony. Mara watched, detached. She'd stopped hoping for inclusion years ago. Hope was expensive. She couldn't afford it. "Mara Ellison, correct?" She looked up, startled. A man stood beside her chair, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat and plain shirt. His face was weathered, tanned from sun and wind, with a strong jaw and eyes the color of worn leather. She recognized him vaguely. Caleb Voss, the rancher who lived outside town, the one people mentioned when they needed someone to blame for refusing to sell land or cooperate with the railroad investors. "Yes," she said quietly. He held out a hand. "Would you dance?" Mara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "A dance," he repeated, his tone even. "If you're willing." She stared at his hand like it was a foreign object. I don't have a card." "Neither do I." "I mean," she fumbled for words. "I wasn't given one." Understanding flickered across his face, brief and sharp. He glanced toward the entrance where a table had been set up earlier with printed dance cards for the unmarried women. Mara had walked past it. No one had offered her one. Caleb's jaw tightened, barely perceptible. He lowered his hand. I see. Mara felt heat crawl up her neck. It's fine. It's not fine. The certainty in his voice made her pause. He turned, scanning the room, then walked toward the entrance table. Mara watched, confused, as he picked up a blank card from the stack left behind. He returned, pulling a pencil from his coat pocket, and began writing. What are you doing? Mara whispered. He didn't answer. He wrote his name on the first line, then the second, then the third. He kept going, filling every slot on the card. 12 dances, all claimed by the same person. When he finished, he handed it to her. Mara stared at the card, her hands trembling. Why? Caleb met her gaze. Because you deserve one. Before she could respond, he extended his hand again. First dance? The room hadn't noticed yet. But it would. The moment she stood, the moment she took his hand, everyone would see. And they would talk. They always talked. Mara's heart pounded. She looked at the card again, at the 12 identical signatures, at the audacity of what he'd just done. She took his hand. The floor felt unsteady beneath her feet as they walked toward the dancers. Caleb's grip was firm, steadying. He led her into position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, and they began to move. It took 30 seconds for the whispers to start. Mara saw Constance Reeves' head snap toward them, her expression shifting from confusion to outrage. Margaret leaned in, whispering something urgent. Iris's eyes widened. Across the room, Mayor Whitlock stopped mid-sentence, his gaze locking onto Mara and Caleb. Beside him, Thomas Reeve, Constance's husband and the town's wealthiest landowner, frowned deeply. The music continued, but the energy in the room shifted. Conversations faltered. Smiles froze. Eyes followed them. Caleb didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. He guided her through the waltz with practiced ease, his expression calm, almost indifferent to the storm building around them. You shouldn't have done this, Mara whispered. Why not? Because She couldn't finish. They'll destroy me. They'll make this worse. They'll never let me forget. Caleb's hand tightened slightly at her waist. Let them talk. It's not that simple. It is, he said quietly. You just decide it is. The waltz ended. Applause rippled through the room, polite, mechanical. Caleb didn't release her hand. Instead, he glanced at the card still clutched in her other palm. Second dance, he said. Mara's breath caught. Caleb, unless you want to stop. She should. She should walk away, thank him quietly, retreat to her corner and wait for the night to end. But something stubborn and reckless flickered inside her, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself in years. No, she said, I don't want to stop. The second waltz began, then the third. By the fourth dance, the whispers had grown into murmurs, sharp and pointed. Women clustered in groups, their voices rising just loud enough to carry. Who does she think she is? Did you see the way she's clinging to him? She must have done something, said something. Poor Mr. Voss. He's too kind for his own good. Mara heard every word. Each one landed like a stone, building weight in her chest. But Caleb kept dancing, his movement steady, his presence solid. During the fifth dance, Thomas Reeve approached. He tapped Caleb's shoulder, his smile tight. Voss, he said, mind if I cut in? Caleb stopped, releasing Mara just enough to turn toward Reeve. Yes, I mind. Reeve's smile faltered. It's customary to share dances, especially at a community event. I'm aware of the customs. Then surely you understand. I understand, Caleb interrupted, his voice calm but unyielding, that I signed her card. All 12 dances. That makes them mine. Reeve's face flushed red. This is highly irregular. So is excluding someone from receiving a card in the first place. Silence dropped like a hammer. Reeve's jaw worked, his eyes narrowing. Around them, conversation stopped entirely. Everyone was listening now. That's not, Reeve began. It is, Caleb said, and we both know it. Reeve's gaze shifted to Mara, cold and dismissive. Miss Ellison, I hope you're not encouraging this kind of spectacle. Mara's throat closed. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Caleb stepped between them, his body angled to block Reeves' view of her. She didn't encourage anything. I made a choice. If you have a problem with it, take it up with me. Reeves' expression hardened. I see. He straightened his vest, his tone dropping into something sharper. Enjoy your evening, Voss. I'm sure we'll speak again soon. He walked away, but the damage was done. The entire room had witnessed the exchange, and in Blackridge, witnesses meant judgment. The remaining dances passed in a haze. Mara moved through them mechanically, her mind spinning. She felt every stare, every whispered comment, every expression of disapproval etched into the faces around her. When the 12th and final dance ended, Caleb released her hand slowly. Thank you, he said. Mara looked up at him, bewildered. For what? For dancing with me. She almost laughed. It came out as a choked sound instead. I should be thanking you. No, Caleb said quietly. You shouldn't have to. He stepped back, nodded once, and walked toward the exit. Mara watched him go, the reality of what had just happened crashing down on her like a wave. She turned to leave, but Constance Reeve blocked her path. Well, Constance said, her voice loud enough for others to hear. That was quite a performance. Mara's hands trembled. I didn't ask for any of this. Of course you didn't. Constance's smile was razor sharp. You just happened to catch the attention of one of the few men in this town with land and money. How fortunate. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? Constance tilted her head. You show up in that sad little dress, sit alone looking pitiful, and suddenly a wealthy rancher can't take his eyes off you. Quite the coincidence. Mara's chest tightened. You're wrong. Am I? Constance leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Mara. Let me tell you how this ends, dear. You think tonight was kindness. It wasn't. It was pity. And pity doesn't last. By tomorrow morning, everyone in this town will know exactly what kind of woman you are. And when Mr. Voss realizes his mistake, and he will, you'll have nothing left. Not your reputation, not your work, nothing. She swept past, leaving Mara standing alone in the center of the emptying hall. The walk home felt endless. Mara's legs moved on instinct, carrying her through dark streets while her mind replayed every moment, every word, every look. She climbed the stairs to her room, shut the door, and pressed her back against it. The dress suddenly felt suffocating. She tore at the buttons, yanking it off and letting it fall to the floor in a heap. She stood in her undergarments, shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. Tomorrow. Tomorrow they would come for her. She knew how this worked. She'd seen it before. Women targeted, rumors spread, reputations dismantled with surgical precision. Blackridge was a small town. There was no escape, no anonymity, no forgiveness. Mara sank onto the edge of her bed, her hands covering her face. She didn't cry. She'd learned years ago that tears solved nothing. Done. Morning came too soon. Mara woke to knocking. Persistent, urgent. She pulled on a robe and opened the door to find Mrs. Talbot standing in the hallway, her face pale. You need to leave, Mrs. Talbot said without preamble. Mara blinked, still foggy with sleep. What? I can't have you here anymore. I'm sorry, but I can't. Mrs. Talbot, I don't understand. Constance revisited me this morning, Mrs. Talbot interrupted, her voice strained. She made it very clear that if I continue to house you, I'll lose business. All of it. I can't afford that, Mara. I have a daughter to feed. Mara's stomach dropped. When? By tonight. Tonight? But Mara's mind raced. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know. Mrs. Talbot's eyes were wet, but her voice stayed firm. I'm sorry, truly. But you brought this on yourself. The door closed. Mara stood frozen, her heart hammering. She turned back into the room, looking at the few possessions she owned. A trunk of clothes, sewing supplies, a few books. Everything she had in the world fit into a single trunk. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, hoping to salvage something, to find work, to find anyone willing to listen. No one was. The bakery turned her away at the door. The general store owner refused to meet her eyes. The laundress who sometimes hired her for piecework shook her head before Mara could even speak. By noon, the message was clear. Blackridge had decided. Mara Ellison was no longer welcome. She sat on a bench near the town square, her trunk beside her, and watched people pass. Some stared, most ignored her. A few mothers pulled their children closer, as if proximity to Mara might contaminate them. She had no plan, no savings, no family, no options. The sun was beginning to set when she heard boots on gravel. She looked up to see Caleb Voss standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. Mara's laugh was bitter. "I'm sure the whole town heard." Caleb glanced around, then sat on the bench beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "I didn't mean for this." "I know. I can fix it." "You can't." Mara's voice was flat. "They've made their decision. Nothing you say will change it." Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I have a ranch, 15 miles outside town. I need help with the house, cleaning, cooking, mending. The work's hard, but it's honest. Room and board included. Wages, too." Mara turned to stare at him. "You're offering me a job?" "I am." "Caleb, if I accept, they'll—" She stopped, realizing the futility. They already had. There was nothing left to protect. "I know what they'll say," Caleb continued. "I know what they'll think. But you need somewhere to go, and I need help. Seems practical." Mara studied his face, searching for hidden motives, for the trap she knew must be there. But all she saw was steady calm and something that looked like resolve. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" Caleb put his hat back on, adjusting the brim. "Because it's right." It wasn't an answer, but it was all he gave. Mara looked down at her trunk, at the bench, at the town square where she'd spent her entire life trying to belong. Then she looked at Caleb. "All right," she said. "I'll take the job." Caleb nodded once. "I'll bring the wagon around." 20 minutes later, Mara sat beside Caleb on the front seat of a weathered wagon, her trunk secured in the back. The town shrank behind them as they rolled down the dirt road, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. She didn't look back. The ranch appeared as the last light bled from the sky, a low house with a stone chimney, a barn that needed paint, and fences that stretched into darkness. Mara could smell hay and livestock, hear the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. The air was different out here, cleaner, emptier. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop near the front porch and climbed down. He retrieved her trunk without comment, carrying it up the steps and into the house. Mara followed, her legs stiff from the ride. Inside, a single lamp burned on a rough wooden table. The main room held a stone fireplace, a worn sofa, shelves lined with books and tools. Everything was functional, spare, a man's space occupied but not decorated. Caleb set the trunk down and gestured toward a hallway. "Guest room's the second door, clean sheets on the bed. Washroom's at the end of the hall." Mara nodded, unsure what to say. Caleb moved to the fireplace, adding wood to the dying embers. "I usually eat around 6 in the morning. If you're not a morning person, you will be. Cattle don't wait." "I wake early," Mara said quietly. "Good." He straightened, brushing ash from his hands. "The work starts tomorrow. Tonight, get settled. There's bread and cheese in the kitchen if you're hungry." He walked past her toward the front door. "Caleb," he stopped, turning. "Thank you," Mara said, "for all of this." His expression didn't change. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the work." The door closed behind him, and Mara was alone. She stood in the center of the unfamiliar room, listening to the silence. It pressed against her ears, vast and strange after years of living above the millinery, where noise filtered up constantly. Voices, footsteps, the clatter of the street below. She found the guest room. It was small, plain, a bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a chipped mirror, a window that looked out over dark fields. She unpacked her trunk slowly, hanging her few dresses in the narrow closet, arranging her sewing supplies on the dresser. When everything was put away, the room still felt empty. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. The weight of the day finally broke through her defenses. She'd lost everything, her room, her work, her name. And now she was here, in a stranger's house, dependent on his charity and bound by the very scandal she'd spent her whole life trying to avoid. She didn't cry, but she came close. Sleep came in fragments broken by unfamiliar sounds, wind rattling the shutters, animals moving in the barn, the creak of old wood settling. When gray light finally seeped through the window, Mara rose, dressed, and made her way to the kitchen. Caleb was already there, pouring coffee from a dented pot. He glanced up when she entered. "Morning." "Morning," Mara echoed. He pushed a cup toward her. "Hope you like it strong." She took the cup, sipping carefully. The coffee was bitter, scorching. She forced herself not to react. Caleb buttered a piece of bread, eating standing up. "I'll be out with the herd until noon. House needs sweeping, laundry's piled in the washroom, pantry could use organizing. There's a list on the table if you forget." Mara looked at the paper he'd left. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Each task numbered and specific. "Understood," she said. Caleb finished his coffee, set the cup in the sink, and grabbed his hat from a peg by the door. "If you need anything, ring the bell on the porch. I'll hear it." Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him. Mara stood alone in the kitchen, the list in her hand, and got to work. The house was larger than it looked. 4 bedrooms, a parlor, a kitchen that opened into a mudroom cluttered with boots and tools. Dust coated every surface, thick and undisturbed. The washroom held a pile of clothes that looked like it had been accumulating for weeks, maybe months. She started with the sweeping, moving methodically from room to room. The repetitive motion was familiar, grounding. Her hands knew this work. As she swept, she noticed small details, a shelf of books on cattle breeding and land management, a framed photograph of an older couple she assumed were Caleb's parents, a rifle mounted above the fireplace, cleaned but clearly used. By mid-morning, she'd filled 2 buckets with dirty water from scrubbing the floors. Her back ached, her hands were raw, but the house was beginning to look like someone cared about it. She tackled the laundry next, hauling water from the pump outside and heating it over the stove. The work was brutal, wringing out heavy fabric, scrubbing stains, hanging everything on lines strung across the yard. By the time she finished, her arms felt like lead. Caleb returned just after noon, riding a large bay horse. He dismounted near the barn, leading the animal inside. Mara watched from the window, wiping her hands on her apron. When he came in, he stopped in the doorway, looking around. "You did all this?" Mara nodded. "Most of it. The pantry still needs work." Caleb walked through the main room, his gaze moving over the swept floors, the cleaned windows, the organized shelves. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise. Maybe approval. "It's good work," he said finally. "It's what you hired me for." Still, he hung his hat on the peg. "Not everyone works this hard." Mara didn't respond. She returned to the kitchen, where she'd started preparing a simple meal, beans, cornbread, the last of the cheese. Caleb washed his hands at the pump and sat at the table without being asked. They ate in silence. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. Just 2 people sharing space, each lost in their own thoughts. After a few minutes, Caleb spoke. "You ever worked a ranch before?" "No." "Figured." He broke off a piece of cornbread. "It's different out here, isolated, quiet. Some people can't handle it." "I can handle quiet." "We'll see." Mara's jaw tightened. "I'm not fragile." Caleb looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Didn't say you were." The silence returned, heavier now. Mara finished eating and began clearing the dishes. Caleb stood, moving toward the door. "I'll be mending fence lines this afternoon. Should be back before dark." "All right." He paused, his hand on the doorframe. "Mara." She turned. "You did good today," he said. "Keep it up." It wasn't much, but it was something. The days fell into a rhythm. Mara woke before dawn, made coffee, prepared breakfast. Caleb ate quickly and left for the day's work, herding cattle, repairing equipment, checking water sources. She cleaned, cooked, mended his worn shirts and torn trousers. The work was endless, but it was honest. No one scrutinized her motives or whispered about her character. She was simply useful. In the evenings, they ate together, brief and efficient. Caleb wasn't much for conversation. He answered questions when asked but didn't volunteer information. Mara learned his rhythms by observation. The way he checked the weather each morning, the careful way he handled his tools, the silence he carried like armor. 3 weeks passed before the first visitor arrived. Mara was hanging laundry when she heard the wagon. She turned to see a well-dressed man climbing down, his coat expensive, his boots polished. He looked out of place against the raw landscape. Thomas Reeve. Mara's hands froze on the clothesline. She watched him approach the house, knocking firmly on the door. When no one answered, he turned, spotting her near the barn. "Miss Ellison," he called, walking toward her. "I was hoping to speak with Mr. Voss." Mara forced herself to stay calm. "He's out with the herd." "When will he return?" "I don't know. Could be hours." Reeves' gaze swept over the yard, taking in the clean porch, the organized equipment, the mended fence near the barn. His expression soured slightly. "I see you've made yourself comfortable." Mara set down the basket of laundry. "I work here." "So I've heard." Reeves smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The whole town's heard, actually. Quite the scandal. The seamstress living alone with a bachelor rancher. People are talking." "Let them talk." "Oh, we are." Reeves stepped closer. "In fact, the town council held a meeting last week. Your arrangement came up. There are concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "Moral concerns," Reeves said smoothly. "Blackridge is a respectable community. We have standards. When those standards are violated, it reflects poorly on all of us." Mara's pulse quickened. "I haven't violated anything." "Haven't you?" Reeve tilted his head. "You're an unmarried woman living under the same roof as an unmarried man. That's improper by any measure." "I'm his employee." "Are you?" Reeves' smile widened. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like something else entirely." Heat flooded Mara's face. "You don't know anything about this." "I know enough." Reeves' tone hardened. "I know that Mr. Voss has made some poor decisions lately. Defending you at the ball. Bringing you here. These choices have consequences for both of you. Is that a threat?" "It's a warning." Reeve adjusted his coat. "Mr. Voss is a landowner, a man of potential influence, but influence can be damaged, reputations can be destroyed. If he continues down this path, he'll find himself isolated, excluded, unable to do business in Blackridge or any surrounding town." Mara's hands clenched. "Why do you care so much about what happens out here?" "Because this isn't just about you, Miss Ellison. It's about order, about maintaining the social fabric that keeps a community strong. When people like you step out of line, it weakens everyone." "People like me?" "Yes." Reeves' expression was cold. "People who forget their place." The sound of hoofbeats cut through the tension. Both turned to see Caleb riding in, his posture tense as he took in the scene. He dismounted quickly, crossing the yard in long strides. "Reeve, what are you doing here?" "Mr. Voss." Reeves' smile returned, practiced and false. "I was hoping to speak with you about a business matter." "I doubt that." "No?" Reeves' eyebrows rose. "Then perhaps I'm here as a concerned member of the community, to discuss the rumors circulating about your living situation." Caleb's jaw tightened. "My living situation is none of your concern." "I'm afraid it is. The town council has received multiple complaints. People are uncomfortable with the arrangement you've created here." "Then they can be uncomfortable." Reeves' smile faded. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not making anything. I hired someone to help with the house, that's all." "Is it?" Reeve glanced at Mara, his meaning clear. "Because it looks like you've taken in a woman of questionable morals and given her access to your home, your property, your—" "Careful," Caleb interrupted, his voice dropping dangerously low. Reeve paused, then continued more cautiously. "I'm simply stating what others are thinking. This situation is inappropriate. It needs to end." "It's not ending." "Then you leave the council no choice but to take action." Caleb stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "What kind of action?" Reeve held his ground, but uncertainty flickered across his face. "Legal action, if necessary. There are ordinances against cohabitation between unmarried individuals. We can enforce them." "Try it." "Caleb," Mara started, but he held up a hand. "No." His eyes stayed locked on Reeve. "You came here to intimidate, to threaten. But you're not going to run me off my own land, and you're not going to tell me who I can hire." Reeves' face flushed red. "You're making an enemy of the wrong people." "I'll take my chances." For a long moment, neither man moved. The air between them crackled with unspoken hostility. Then Reeves stepped back, straightening his coat. This isn't over, Voss. I know. Reeve returned to his wagon, climbing up with stiff movements. He snapped the reins, and the horse pulled away, kicking up dust. Caleb watched until the wagon disappeared from view. Then he turned to Mara. You all right? Mara's hands were shaking. He threatened you. He tried. Caleb, this is exactly what I was afraid of. They're not going to let this go. They're going to keep pushing until what? Caleb's tone was calm, almost gentle. Until I fire you. Send you back to a town that's already decided you're worthless. Mara flinched. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Caleb pulled off his gloves, tucking them into his belt. I knew what this would cost when I hired you. I made that choice, and I'm not taking it back because some pompous bastard shows up waving threats. But if they take legal action, let them. Caleb started toward the house. I've dealt with worse. Mara followed, her mind racing. This is my fault. Caleb stopped at the door, turning to face her. It's not your fault that this town is full of small-minded hypocrites. It's not your fault that they need someone to punish to feel better about themselves. And it's sure as hell not your fault that I chose to do the right thing. His words landed like stones, solid and unmovable. I just don't want you to lose everything because of me, Mara said quietly. I won't. Caleb opened the door. But even if I did, it'd be worth it. He went inside, leaving Mara standing on the porch, her heart pounding. The threats escalated slowly, insidiously. A week after Reeves' visit, one of Caleb's regular buyers backed out of a cattle contract, citing moral reservations. Another supplier refused to deliver feed, suddenly claiming supply shortages. At the general store in town, the clerk informed Caleb that his credit was no longer good. Caleb absorbed each blow without visible reaction, adjusting his plans, finding alternative solutions. But Mara saw the strain building, the late nights spent going over accounts, the tightness in his shoulders when he thought she wasn't looking. One evening, she found him at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills and contracts. How bad is it? She asked. Caleb didn't look up. Manageable. That's not an answer. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. They're squeezing, slowly, making it harder to do business. But I've got savings. And I'm not the only rancher out here. I can find other buyers. Mara sat across from him. What if you can't? Then I'll figure something else out. Caleb, I'm not giving up, Mara. His voice was firm. And I'm not sending you away, so stop asking. She hadn't asked, but he was right. She'd been thinking it. The guilt was constant now, a weight she carried through every chore, every meal, every quiet evening. I could leave on my own, she said carefully. Find work somewhere else. Another town, far enough away that… No. You didn't let me finish. I don't need to. Caleb met her gaze. You leave now. They win. They prove that all they have to do is apply pressure and people will break. I won't be part of that. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about survival. It's about both. Caleb's expression softened slightly. Look, I know this is hard. I know you didn't ask for any of it, but running won't solve anything. It'll just move the problem somewhere else. Mara's throat tightened. I don't know how to fight them. You don't have to fight. You just have to stay. It sounded simple, but Mara knew it wasn't. 2 days later, the sheriff arrived. Mara was in the garden, pulling weeds, when she heard the horse. She looked up to see a man in a badge dismounting near the house. Caleb emerged from the barn, wiping grease from his hands. Sheriff Palmer, Caleb said evenly. What brings you out here? Palmer was a stocky man in his 50s, with a gray mustache and tired eyes. Official business, I'm afraid. What kind? Palmer pulled a folded paper from his coat. Complaint's been filed. Says you're violating Ordinance 47, cohabitation between unmarried individuals of opposite gender. Caleb took the paper, scanning it. This is ridiculous. Maybe so, but it's my job to enforce the law. Palmer's tone was apologetic but firm. You got 2 options. Either Miss Ellison leaves, or you face a fine and potential court proceedings. How much is the fine? $50 per week. Caleb's face darkened. That's extortion. That's the law. A law no one enforces unless they want to harass someone. Palmer sighed. I don't make the rules, Voss. I just follow them. You want to fight it, take it up with the council. The counsel that filed the complaint in the first place? Look, I'm trying to give you a fair warning here. Pay the fine or end the arrangement. Those are your choices. Mara stepped forward, her heart hammering. I'll leave. Both men turned to her. No, Caleb said flatly. Caleb, $50 a week. I can afford it. For how long? Mara's voice rose. They'll bleed you dry, and we both know it. This isn't sustainable. Caleb handed the paper back to Palmer. Tell the council I'll pay their damn fine. But Miss Ellison stays. Palmer hesitated, then pocketed the paper. All right, first payment's due by Friday. He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Caleb and Mara standing in the yard. You can't do this, Mara said desperately. You'll lose everything. Maybe. Caleb's voice was hard. But I won't lose it by backing down. That's pride talking. So what if it is? He turned to face her fully. You think I don't know what this costs? You think I haven't calculated exactly how much damage they can do? I know, Mara, I've always known, and I'm still choosing this. Why? The word came out broken. Why are you doing this for me? Caleb was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, almost raw. Because someone should have done it a long time ago. The simplicity of it broke something inside her. Mara felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. I'm not worth this, she whispered. That's where you're wrong. He walked past her toward the barn, leaving her standing alone in the fading light. That night, Mara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She could hear Caleb moving around in the main room, restless. The fines would ruin him. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. And when the money ran out, the council would find other ways to apply pressure. Legal action, property seizures, social exile so complete he'd never recover, all because he'd chosen kindness over cruelty. She couldn't let it happen. But she didn't know how to stop it. The answer came 3 days later in the form of another visitor. Mara was scrubbing pots when she heard the knock. She dried her hands and opened the door to find Constance Reeve standing on the porch, her expression smug. Mrs. Reeve, Mara said carefully, what do you want? To have a conversation, woman to woman. Mara didn't move. About what? About ending this situation before it destroys you both. Constance's smile was cold. May I come in? Every instinct screamed at Mara to refuse, but curiosity and a desperate hope that maybe somehow there was a way out made her step aside. Constance entered, her gaze sweeping over the clean kitchen, the organized shelves. You've done well here. I'll give you that. Mara crossed her arms. What do you want, Constance? To offer you a solution. Constance sat at the table uninvited. The council is prepared to drop the complaint and cease all financial penalties. In exchange, you leave Blackridge permanently. No return, no contact with anyone here. And if I refuse, then the fines continue and escalate. $50 this week, $100 next week, $200 the week after will drain every cent he has until there's nothing left. Mara's nails bit into her palms. You're destroying a man's life because you don't like where he chooses to live. We're maintaining order, Constance corrected. Something you clearly don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're bullies, all of you. Constance's smile didn't waver. Call us what you like, but the offer stands. Leave quietly, and this ends. Stay, and we'll make sure you both regret it. Why do you care so much? Mara demanded. What did I ever do to you? For the first time, something genuine flickered in Constance's expression, something hard and bitter. You existed, she said simply, in a way that reminds everyone of how fragile their position really is. People like you are dangerous because you don't play by the rules. And if we let that slide, the whole system collapses. The system's already broken. Perhaps, Constance stood. But it's our system, and we'll protect it. She walked to the door, pausing at the threshold. You have until Sunday to decide. After that, the fines triple. The door closed, and Mara was alone again. She sank into a chair, her mind spinning. The offer was real. Leave, and Caleb would be free. Stay, and she'd destroy him. But leaving meant admitting defeat. It meant letting them win. It meant accepting that people like her didn't deserve dignity or choice. When Caleb came home that evening, she told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finished, he sat back, exhaling slowly. "So they want you gone?" "Yes. And if you leave, they'll stop." That's what she said. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" Mara stared at him. "It's not about what I want. It's about what makes sense." "That's not what I asked." She couldn't answer. Because what she wanted, to stay, to fight, to prove that she had as much right to exist as anyone else, seemed impossibly selfish against the reality of what it would cost him. "I don't know," she admitted finally. Caleb leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Then let me tell you what I want. I want you to stay. I want to pay their damn fines until they choke on their own greed, and I want to prove that they don't get to decide who matters and who doesn't." "That's not practical. I don't care." "Caleb, Mara, listen to me." His voice was intense, urgent. "I've spent my whole life watching people get pushed around by men like Reeve. Ranchers forced off their land. Families destroyed because they couldn't pay debts the banks manufactured. Workers cheated out of wages. I watched it happen, and I did nothing, because it wasn't my fight, because it was easier to keep my head down." He paused, his jaw working. "But this time, it is my fight, because they came after someone under my roof, someone I chose to protect. And if I back down now, I'm no better than the people who looked away when I needed help." Mara's breath caught. "When you needed help?" Caleb stood abruptly, turning away. "Forget it." "No." Mara rose, moving toward him. "What happened?" He didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "My father lost this ranch to bad debt 15 years ago. Medical bills from when my mother got sick. He couldn't pay, so the bank foreclosed. Took everything. My father fought it, tried to find someone, anyone, to help. But no one would go against the bank. They all stood by and watched us lose everything." Mara's chest tightened. "How did you get the ranch back?" "Worked myself half to death for 10 years, saved every penny. When the ranch went up for auction again, I bought it back." Caleb turned to face her. "But my father never saw it. He died 2 years before I had the money, and my mother was already gone." Understanding crashed over Mara. "That's why you're doing this." "Partly." Caleb's expression was raw. "But mostly because it's right, and I'm tired of watching the wrong people win." Mara felt something shift inside her, a resolve crystallizing into certainty. She'd spent her whole life running from conflict, accepting scraps, shrinking herself to fit into spaces that didn't want her. Not anymore. "Then I'm staying," she said. Caleb's eyes searched hers. "You sure?" "No." Mara's laugh was shaky. "But I'm doing it anyway." For the first time since she'd met him, Caleb smiled. A real one, small but genuine. "All right then," he said. "Let's give them hell." The fines came like clockwork. Every Friday, Sheriff Palmer rode out with an envelope, his face apologetic but unyielding. $50 the first week, $75 the second. By the fourth week, they jumped to $120. Caleb paid without complaint, counting out bills from a metal lockbox he kept under his bed. Mara watched the stack of money shrink, her stomach twisting tighter with each payment. "We need to fight this," she said one evening after Palmer had left. "Legally, there has to be something we can do." Caleb replaced the lockbox, sliding it back under the bed frame. "Fight it how?" "The judge is Thomas Reeves' brother-in-law. The lawyers in Blackridge won't take a case against the council, and hiring someone from outside costs more than the fines. So we just keep paying until I run out of money or they get bored." Caleb straightened, brushing dust from his hands. "Whichever comes first." "That's not a plan. It's the only plan we've got." Mara paced the small room, frustration building. There has to be another way, something that makes them stop without... She cut herself off, but Caleb caught it. "Without what?" "Without me leaving." Caleb crossed his arms. "That's not happening." "You keep saying that, but the math doesn't lie. At this rate, you'll be broke by winter." "Then I'll be broke." "Caleb, Mara." His voice was firm but not angry. "I know you're trying to fix this. I know you feel responsible, but you're not. They are. And I'm not rewarding their bullying by giving them what they want." Even if it destroys you? Even then. The certainty in his tone should have been reassuring. Instead, it terrified her. Because Mara had learned long ago that good intentions didn't stop bad outcomes. Caleb's stubbornness might be noble, but it wouldn't save the ranch when the money ran out. She needed a different solution, one that didn't require either of them to surrender. The idea came to her 2 days later while mending a torn shirt. She was sitting on the porch, needle moving through fabric, when the thought struck her with such clarity she nearly stabbed her finger. Marriage. Not real marriage, not the kind built on affection or partnership, but legal marriage. The kind that invalidated every accusation the council had leveled against them. If they were married, the cohabitation charge collapsed. The moral outrage evaporated. The fines became unenforceable. It was reckless, insane even, but it was also practical. Mara set down the shirt, her mind racing. Marriage would solve the immediate problem, but it would create new complications. Caleb had never suggested anything romantic between them. Their arrangement was professional, transactional. Proposing marriage would cross a line she wasn't sure either of them wanted to cross. But what choice did they have? She waited until dinner to bring it up, rehearsing the words in her head a dozen different ways. None of them sounded right. When Caleb finally sat down across from her, she abandoned all pretense of subtlety. "We should get married." Caleb paused mid-bite, his fork hovering over his plate. "What?" "Not for real," Mara added quickly. "Just legally, to stop the fines." He set the fork down slowly. "You want to marry me to avoid paying the council?" "Yes." "That's your plan?" "It's a better plan than bankruptcy." Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "You've thought this through." "I have." "And you think getting married, legally binding ourselves together in front of the same people trying to destroy us, is going to make things better?" "It'll make the charges invalid," Mara said. "They can't fine you for cohabitation if we're married. The whole basis of their complaint disappears. And what happens after? We just stay married forever?" Mara hesitated. She hadn't thought that far ahead. "We could annul it later when things settle down." "If they settle down." "They will. Eventually, people move on to new scandals." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady and searching. "You really think this is the answer?" "I think it's the only answer that doesn't end with you losing everything." He stood abruptly, walking to the window. Mara watched him, her heart pounding. She'd overstepped, pushed too hard. He was going to refuse, and she'd have to watch him bleed money week after week until there was nothing left. "It won't be easy," Caleb said finally, his back still turned. "Being married to me, even on paper. This town won't forgive it. They'll find new ways to make us miserable." "I know." "And you're willing to do it anyway. Are you?" Caleb turned, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain, not scared exactly, but cautious, like he was weighing something heavy and irreversible. "I don't want you to feel trapped," he said quietly. "Marriage it's permanent, even if it's just a legal fiction. Once we do this, there's no going back to how things were." "I don't want to go back," Mara said. "I want to stop running, and this is the only way I know how." Caleb exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "All right, if you're sure." "I'm sure." "Then we'll do it." The simplicity of his agreement left Mara breathless. She'd expected more resistance, more questions, but Caleb had always been direct. When he made a decision, he committed. "When?" she asked. "Soon as possible, before they triple the fines again." "Where?" Caleb thought for a moment. "There's a minister in Ridgemont, 20 miles east. He doesn't ask questions." "You've used him before?" "Once, for a friend who needed paperwork fast." Caleb moved back to the table, sitting down with renewed purpose. "We'll go tomorrow. Get it done quickly. File the certificate with the county clerk before the council can interfere." Mara nodded, trying to ignore the surreal nature of the conversation. They were discussing marriage like it was a business contract, which, she supposed, it was. "What do we tell people?" she asked. "The truth, that we're married. They can draw their own conclusions. They'll assume we were forced into it. Let them assume." Caleb picked up his fork again, returning to his meal. As long as the charges stick, their assumptions don't matter. Mara watched him eat, marveling at his composure. Her own stomach was too knotted to manage more than a few bites. Tomorrow, she'd be married. To a man she barely knew. In a ceremony designed to outmaneuver people who wanted her erased. It should have felt wrong, desperate. Instead, it felt like the first real choice she'd made in years. They left at dawn, the wagon rattling over rough roads as the sun climbed. Mara wore her best dress, the same pewter cotton from the harvest ball, now cleaned and pressed. Caleb had changed into a dark suit that looked uncomfortable on him, the collar tight against his neck. Neither spoke much during the ride. The silence wasn't hostile, just weighted with the magnitude of what they were about to do. Ridgemont was smaller than Black Ridge, a collection of buildings clustered around a crossroads. The minister's house sat at the edge of town, a modest structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Caleb knocked. A thin man in his 60s answered, squinting through wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Voss," the minister said, recognition flickering. "It's been a while." "Reverend Michaels," Caleb gestured to Mara. "This is Mara Ellison. We need to be married. Today, if possible." Michaels raised his eyebrows but didn't question it. "Come in." The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. Michaels read from a worn book, his voice droning through familiar passages. Mara and Caleb stood side by side, their hands clasped loosely. When prompted, they exchanged simple vows, words that felt both profound and hollow. "Do you, Caleb Voss, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Mara Ellison, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Mara's throat was dry. "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." There was no kiss, no celebration. Michaels handed them a signed certificate, accepted Caleb's payment, and wished them well with an expression that suggested he'd seen this exact scenario many times before. They returned to the wagon, the certificate folded carefully in Mara's hands. She stared at it during the ride home, at the official seal and the signatures that made it real. "How do you feel?" Caleb asked after a while. Mara looked up. "Strange." "Good strange or bad strange?" "I'm not sure yet." Caleb nodded, turning his attention back to the road. "That's fair." They filed the certificate with the county clerk's office the next morning, enduring the clerk's shocked expression and hurried congratulations. By afternoon, word had spread. By evening, the first response arrived. Sheriff Palmer knocked just after sunset. Caleb answered, Mara standing behind him. "Heard you two got hitched," Palmer said, his tone neutral. "We did," Caleb confirmed. Palmer shifted uncomfortably. "Counsel's not happy about it." "I imagine not. They're saying it's a sham, a trick to avoid the fines." "Is there a law against marrying someone to avoid fines?" Caleb asked. Palmer hesitated. "Not exactly." "Then what's the problem?" "The problem is they don't believe it's real. They don't have to believe it. They just have to accept it." Caleb crossed his arms. "The certificate's legal, filed with the county. That makes the cohabitation charge invalid." Palmer sighed, pulling off his hat. "Look, Voss, I'm just the messenger, but you should know, they're talking about contesting the marriage, claiming it's fraudulent." "On what grounds?" "That it was entered into under false pretenses, that there's no genuine intent to form a marital union." Caleb's expression darkened. "How exactly do they plan to prove that?" "I don't know. But Thomas Reeve doesn't lose gracefully. If he thinks there's a way to invalidate this, he'll find it." After Palmer left, Mara sank onto the sofa, her hands shaking. "They're going to destroy this too." "They're going to try," Caleb corrected. "But proving fraudulent marriage is damn near impossible. We're living together. We're legally bound. Unless they can find evidence that we explicitly plan to annul it, there's nothing they can do." "What if they manufacture evidence?" "Then we fight it." Mara looked up at him, exhausted. "How? With what resources? We're running out of options, Caleb." He sat beside her, the sofa creaking under his weight. "I know it feels that way, but we're not beaten yet. We're married to people we barely know to avoid financial ruin. That's not winning." "Maybe not," Caleb admitted, "but it's not losing either." The distinction felt thin, but Mara didn't have the energy to argue. The council's next move came faster than expected. 3 days after the marriage, a formal hearing was scheduled. Mara and Caleb were summoned to appear before the town council to address allegations of marriage fraud. "This is insane," Mara said, reading the summons. "They can't just haul us into a hearing because they don't like our decisions." "They can if they claim it's a matter of public interest," Caleb said grimly. "And in Blackridge, the council decides what counts as public interest." "So what do? We show up, answer their questions, and make it clear we're not backing down." The hearing was held in the town hall, the same building where the harvest ball had taken place. The irony wasn't lost on Mara as she walked through the doors, Caleb at her side. The council sat at a long table at the front of the room. Thomas Reeve, Mayor Whitlock, and 3 other men Mara recognized but couldn't name. Behind them, the room was packed with spectators, their faces eager and hostile. Constance sat in the front row, her expression triumphant. Reeve called the hearing to order, his voice echoing through the space. "We're here today to address serious concerns regarding the recent marriage of Caleb Voss and Mara Ellison. Specifically, whether this marriage was entered into in good faith or as a deliberate attempt to circumvent lawful penalties." Caleb stood. "The marriage is legal, filed and certified. What we choose to do privately is none of your concern." "It becomes our concern," Reeve countered, "when it undermines the integrity of our legal system. Marriage is a sacred institution, not a loophole." "Then maybe you shouldn't have weaponized it," Caleb shot back. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Reeve's face flushed. "Mr. Voss, I suggest you show this council the respect it deserves." "I'll show respect when this council earns it." The tension in the room was suffocating. Mara felt every eye on them, judging, condemning. Reeve shuffled papers, regaining his composure. "Very well, let's proceed. Miss Ellison, excuse me, Mrs. Voss, how long have you known the man you married?" Mara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "A few months? And during that time, did you develop romantic feelings for him?" The question was a trap. Mara knew it. If she said yes, they'd demand proof. If she said no, they'd claim the marriage was fraudulent. "I respect him," she said carefully. "That's enough." "Respect isn't love, Mrs. Voss. It's a better foundation than most marriages have." A few scattered laughs broke out. Reeve's scowl deepened. "Did Mr. Voss propose to you out of affection or to avoid financial penalties?" "Both can be true." "Answer the question." Mara met Reeve's gaze, refusing to flinch. "He proposed because it was the right thing to do, and I accepted for the same reason." "That's not a romantic proposal, Mrs. Voss. That's a business arrangement." "So are half the marriages in this town," Mara said sharply. "But you're not interrogating them." Gasps erupted. Reeve slammed his hand on the table. "You will address this council with respect." "I'll address it the same way it addresses me," Mara said, her voice rising. "Which is to say, like, I'm something to be controlled and punished for existing." The room exploded into noise, shouts of agreement, cries of outrage. Reeve banged a gavel, demanding order. Caleb stepped forward, his presence commanding silence. "This hearing is a farce. You're not interested in truth. You're interested in forcing us to submit. But we won't. We're married, legally. And unless you can prove otherwise in an actual court of law, you have no authority here." "We have every authority," Reeve hissed. "No," Caleb said coldly. "You have a title in a room full of people too scared to stand up to you. That's not authority. That's bullying." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Reeve stood, his face livid. "This hearing is adjourned, but mark my words, Voss, this isn't over. We will find a way to prove your marriage is a fraud. And when we do, you'll both pay for making fools of this council." "We'll be waiting," Caleb said. They walked out together, the crowd parting reluctantly. Outside, the evening air was cool and sharp. Mara's legs felt weak, but she forced herself to keep walking. "That went well?" she said, her voice shaking. Caleb almost smiled. "Could have been worse." "How?" "They could have arrested us." Mara laughed, a broken, desperate sound. "That's your standard for success?" "For now." They climbed into the wagon, and Caleb snapped the reins. As Blackridge disappeared behind them, Mara felt something shift. Not hope exactly, but a fierce, stubborn refusal to break. Reeve wanted her gone. The council wanted her silent. The town wanted her erased. But she was still here, and she wasn't leaving. The retaliation came in smaller, crueler ways after the hearing. Suppliers stopped delivering to the ranch entirely, forcing Caleb to travel twice as far for basic goods. The bank that held a small loan on his equipment suddenly demanded early repayment. At the general store, prices doubled whenever Caleb or Mara walked through the door. Each obstacle was designed to exhaust them, to make survival so difficult that leaving became the only logical choice. But Caleb had been raised on this land. He knew how to make do with less. He bartered with neighboring ranchers, traded labor for supplies, and stretched every dollar until it screamed. Mara threw herself into the work with equal intensity. She took on sewing jobs from nearby towns, mending clothes and stitching quilts late into the night to bring in extra money. Her hands grew calloused, her back ached constantly, but she refused to slow down. They fell into a rhythm, exhausting and relentless, but theirs. Meals were simple, conversations brief. But there was a solidarity building between them, forged in shared struggle. One evening, Mara found Caleb at the kitchen table, staring at a ledger filled with numbers that didn't add up the way he needed them to. "How bad?" she asked, sitting across from him. "We can last another 3 months, maybe 4 if we're careful. And then? Then we hope something changes." Mara reached across the table, her hand covering his. The gesture surprised them both. Caleb's gaze dropped to their joined hands, then back to her face. "We'll figure it out," Mara said quietly. "Together." Caleb's fingers tightened around hers, a silent acknowledgement, a fragile trust. "Yeah," he said. "We will." For the first time since the hearing, Mara allowed herself to believe it might be true. But belief was a dangerous thing, because 2 days later, everything fell apart. Mara was in the barn organizing tools when she heard horses, multiple horses. She stepped outside to see 5 riders approaching. Sheriff Palmer in front, 4 deputies behind him. Her stomach dropped. Caleb emerged from the house, his expression immediately wary. "Palmer, what's this about?" Palmer dismounted, his face grim. "I've got a warrant, Voss. You're under arrest." "For what?" "Assault." Caleb's face went blank. "That's a lie." "Complaint was filed this morning. Says you attacked Thomas Reeve outside his property 3 nights ago. Witnesses corroborate." "I was here 3 nights ago. Mara can confirm." Palmer glanced at Mara, then back at Caleb. "Respectfully, your wife's testimony isn't going to hold much weight, not given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" Mara demanded, stepping forward. "He's telling the truth. He was here all night." "Ma'am, I understand you want to protect your husband, but I'm not protecting him," Mara interrupted, fury rising. "I'm telling you what happened. He didn't leave the ranch. He couldn't have assaulted anyone." Palmer's expression was pained. "I believe you believe that, but I've got a warrant and I have to execute it. Voss, you can come quietly, or we can make this difficult." Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked at Mara and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of options, all of them bad. "Don't fight this," Mara said urgently. "We'll sort it out. Get a lawyer. Prove you were here." "They'll keep me locked up until trial," Caleb said. "Could be weeks. Then we'll manage." Mara, "Go," she said firmly. "I'll handle the ranch. You handle this." Caleb held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. He turned to Palmer, extending his wrists. "Let's get this over with." Palmer cuffed him, apologizing quietly as he did. The deputies surrounded Caleb, leading him to a horse. Mara watched, helpless, as they rode away, taking Caleb with them. When the dust settled, she was alone. The ranch felt impossibly large without Caleb. Every sound was amplified, the wind against the shutters, the cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of her own footsteps on the wood floors. Mara tried to maintain the routines they'd built, but everything was harder without him. The animals needed feeding, the fences needed mending, the accounts needed managing. She worked until her hands bled and her vision blurred, but it was never enough. On the 3rd day, she rode into town to find a lawyer. The only one willing to meet with her was an older man named James Garrett, whose office smelled like tobacco and old paper. "Mrs. Voss," Garrett said, gesturing to a chair, "I heard about your husband's arrest. Unfortunate business." "It's a false charge," Mara said. "He was with me the night Reeve claims he was attacked." Garrett leaned back, his expression skeptical. "You understand that your testimony as his wife may not be considered reliable." "I understand that the entire charge is fabricated to force us out." Perhaps, but proving that in court will be difficult. Reeve has witnesses, credible ones. Who? Two men who claim they saw your husband near Reeve's property that night. Both are respected members of the community. They're lying. Probably, Garrett agreed, but convincing a jury of that is another matter. Mara's frustration boiled over. So what do we do? We build a defense, establish an alibi, find inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. Garrett pulled out a notepad. But I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Voss, this trial isn't really about assault. It's about punishing your husband for defying the council, and juries in this county tend to side with men like Thomas Reeve. Then we change their minds. Garrett smiled faintly. I admire your optimism, but optimism doesn't win trials. Evidence does. And right now, we don't have much. Mara left the office feeling more hopeless than when she'd entered. She walked through town, ignoring the stares and whispers, until she reached the general store. She needed supplies, flour, sugar, coffee. Basics they were running low on. The clerk, a young man named Peter, looked nervous when she approached. Mrs. Voss, he said quietly. I'm sorry, but I can't serve you. Mara's hands tightened on the counter. Why not? Owner's orders. No credit, no sales. Not to you or your husband. I'm not asking for credit. I have cash. Peter shifted uncomfortably. It's not about payment. It's policy. Policy, Mara repeated, her voice flat. I'm sorry. She turned and walked out, rage and humiliation burning through her. They were starving her out, cutting off every resource until she had no choice but to leave. Back at the ranch, Mara stared at the nearly empty pantry. They had enough food for maybe a week if she rationed carefully. After that, she'd have to find another town, another store. More time, more energy she didn't have. She sank onto the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, and finally let herself cry. Not gentle tears, but harsh, gasping sobs that tore through her chest and left her shaking. She'd been so sure they could fight this, so convinced that willpower and stubbornness would be enough. But she was just one person, and the entire town was against her. The sound of hoofbeats cut through her despair. Mara scrambled to her feet, wiping her face. She peered through the window to see a lone rider approaching, a woman, small and quick, dismounting near the porch. Mara opened the door cautiously. The woman was young, maybe 20, with dark hair tied back and dirt on her skirt. Mrs. Voss? The woman asked. Yes. My name's Anna. Anna Pritchard. I live about 10 miles south of here. She glanced around nervously. I heard what happened to your husband, and I wanted to help. Mara blinked, stunned. Help how? Anna reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. Food. Not much, but it's what I could spare. And she hesitated. I know you've been cut off from the stores. If you need supplies, I can get them for you. Discreetly. Mara stared at the bundle, her throat tight. Why would you do this? Anna's expression hardened. Because what they're doing to you is wrong, and someone needs to say it. Mara took the bundle, her hands trembling. Inside was bread, cheese, dried meat, simple things, lifelines. Thank you, she whispered. Anna nodded. I'll come back in a few days. With more, if you need it. She mounted her horse and rode off before Mara could say anything else. Mara stood on the porch, the bundle clutched to her chest, and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. A reminder that not everyone in the world was cruel. That kindness, however small, still existed. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to keep fighting. Anna returned 4 days later with flour, salt, and coffee beans wrapped in burlap. She stayed only long enough to unload the supplies and refuse Mara's offer of payment. Save your money, Anna said, already mounting her horse. You'll need it more than I do. I can't keep taking charity, Mara protested. It's not charity, it's neighbors helping neighbors. Anna's expression softened. My husband died 2 years ago, left me with a farm and debts I couldn't pay. The bank was going to foreclose, but Mr. Voss bought my note and tore it up. Said I could pay him back when I was able. I never forgot that. Mara's chest tightened. Caleb had never mentioned it, never used his generosity as currency or proof of character. He'd just done it and moved on. He's a good man, Anna continued. and what they're doing to him is evil. So no, Mrs. Voss, this isn't charity. It's the least I can do." She rode off before Mara could respond, leaving her standing in the yard with supplies she desperately needed and a growing understanding of the man she'd married. The trial was set for 2 weeks out. Garrett came to the ranch 3 times to prepare, drilling Mara on her testimony, warning her about the questions the prosecutor would ask. Each session left her more anxious than the last. "They're going to attack your credibility," Garrett said during the 3rd visit. "Suggest you're lying to protect your husband. Imply the marriage itself proves you're willing to deceive for personal gain. So what do I do?" "Tell the truth. Stay calm. Don't let them provoke you into anger." Garrett closed his notepad. "And pray the jury sees reason." Mara didn't believe in prayer, but she nodded anyway. The jail allowed visitors twice a week. Mara rode into town on Wednesdays and Saturdays, enduring the hostile stares and whispered insults to sit across from Caleb in a cramped room that smelled like sweat and desperation. He looked thinner each time she saw him, his face drawn, shadows under his eyes. But his resolve hadn't cracked. "How's the ranch?" he asked during her 4th visit. "Still standing. Barely." Mara tried to smile. "Anna Pritchard's been bringing supplies, says you helped her once." Caleb's expression flickered with something between embarrassment and resignation. "That was a long time ago." "She remembers." "Yeah, well." He shifted in his chair. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." "Liar." Mara's throat tightened. "I'm managing." "That's not the same thing." Caleb leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Mara, if this gets too hard, if you need to leave—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't give me permission to abandon you." "I'm not. I'm giving you permission to survive." "I'm surviving by staying." Caleb studied her face, searching for cracks. "You've gotten stubborn." "I learned from the best." A faint smile crossed his lips, brief and genuine. "Garrett thinks we have a chance. Small, but real." "Do you believe him?" "I believe he's good at his job. Whether that's enough—" Caleb trailed off, his gaze distant. "I've been thinking about what happens if they convict me. The ranch will need someone to run it. There's a man named Sam Fletcher, lives about 40 miles north. Good rancher, honest. If I write him, he might be willing to help manage things until—" "Until what?" Mara's voice was sharp. "Until you get out? Or until they take everything and there's nothing left to manage?" "Mara—" "No." She stood, her hands flat on the table between them. "You don't get to plan for failure, not yet. We fight this. We win. And if we don't win, we figure out the next step together. But you don't get to write me instructions for how to live without you." Caleb stared at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. All right." The guard knocked on the door, signaling the end of visiting hours. Mara walked out, her legs unsteady, and didn't look back. If she looked back, she might not be able to leave. The night before the trial, Mara couldn't sleep. She paced the house, checking locks, organizing papers, trying to calm the anxiety clawing at her chest. Finally, she gave up and sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. The stars were bright out here, away from town lights, endless and indifferent. She stared up at them, wondering if any of this mattered in the grand scope of things. A woman and a man fighting a system designed to crush them. Maybe they were fools. Maybe survival meant knowing when to surrender. But Mara had surrendered her whole life, accepted her place, stayed quiet, and it had earned her nothing but contempt. If she was going to lose anyway, she might as well lose fighting. The courtroom was packed when Mara arrived, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. The air was thick with anticipation, hostile and eager. This wasn't about justice. This was entertainment. Caleb sat at the defendant's table beside Garrett, wearing the same suit from their wedding. He looked tired but composed. When Mara entered, his gaze found hers, holding for just a moment before the bailiff called for order. Judge Harrison presided, a gray-haired man in his 60s with a reputation for strictness. He banged the gavel, and the room fell silent. The prosecutor was a sharp-faced man named Douglas Kent, known for his ruthless efficiency. He stood, buttoning his jacket, and began his opening statement with theatrical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is simple. On the night of October 12th, Thomas Reeve was brutally attacked outside his home. The assailant struck him from behind, causing significant injury. 2 witnesses saw the defendant, Caleb Voss, fleeing the scene. The evidence is clear. The guilt is undeniable. Kent painted Caleb as violent, unstable, a man consumed by resentment toward the council and willing to resort to brutality when legal avenues failed. He described the attack in graphic detail, emphasizing Reeves' injuries, the cowardice of striking from behind. Mara's hands clenched in her lap. Every word was calculated to inflame, to convince the jury that Caleb was dangerous. Garrett's opening was quieter, less dramatic. He acknowledged the seriousness of the charges but emphasized the lack of physical evidence linking Caleb to the crime. He pointed out the convenient timing, how the arrest came just days after Caleb's marriage invalidated the council's fines. He suggested alternative motives, hinted at manipulation. But his words felt thin against Kent's vivid narrative. The prosecution called Thomas Reeve first. He walked to the stand with a slight limp, his face bruised, his arm in a sling. The jury watched sympathetically as he was sworn in. Kent led him through the events of that night with practiced care. Reeve described hearing a noise outside his home, going to investigate, being struck from behind. He'd fallen, disoriented, and glimpsed a figure running away, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat. "And did you recognize this individual?" Kent asked. "I believe it was Caleb Voss," Reeves said. "Why do you believe that?" "The build matched. The coat was similar to one I'd seen him wear, and given our recent conflicts, it seemed logical." Garrett stood for cross-examination, his tone polite but pointed. "Mr. Reeve, you said you only glimpsed the attacker. Is that correct?" "Yes." "For how long?" "A few seconds." "And it was dark, correct?" "Yes, but—" "So in a few seconds of darkness, while disoriented from being struck, you identified Mr. Voss based on build and a coat." Reeves' jaw tightened. "I know what I saw." "Do you? Or do you know what you wanted to see?" Garrett didn't wait for an answer. "Mr. Reeve, isn't it true that you've been engaged in a prolonged conflict with Mr. Voss over his refusal to cooperate with the railroad expansion you're invested in?" "That's irrelevant." "Is it? Isn't it also true that you've used your position on the town council to levy fines against Mr. Voss, fines that were invalidated when he married Mrs. Voss?" Ken objected. The judge sustained. Garrett rephrased, circling back to inconsistencies in Reeves' timeline, the lack of other witnesses, the absence of a weapon or physical evidence. By the time Reeves stepped down, doubt had been planted. Not much, but enough. The prosecution called its witnesses next, 2 men who claimed they'd seen Caleb near Reeves' property that night. The first was Harold Briggs, a shopkeeper. The second was Martin Cole, a deputy. Both told similar stories. They'd been returning from a card game when they spotted a man matching Caleb's description walking quickly away from Reeves' estate. They hadn't thought much of it until hearing about the attack the next day. Garrett dismantled their testimonies methodically. He established that both men were friends of Reeve, that both had financial ties to his businesses. He questioned the visibility that night, the reliability of identifying someone from a distance in darkness. He pointed out that neither man had reported seeing anything suspicious until after Caleb's arrest was made public. "Isn't it convenient," Garrett said to Cole, "that you, a deputy, only remembered this crucial detail after your employer decided to press charges?" Cole bristled. "I remembered when it became relevant." "Or when it became profitable," Kent objected again. This time the judge overruled. By afternoon, the prosecution rested. Garrett called Mara to the stand. She walked forward on shaking legs, raised her hand, swore to tell the truth. The room felt impossibly large. Every face turned toward her, judging. Garrett's questions were straightforward. Where was Caleb the night of October 12th? With her at the ranch. What time did he arrive home? Before sunset. Did he leave at any point? No. Was she certain? Absolutely. Then Kent stood for cross-examination, and the atmosphere shifted. "Mrs. Voss," he began, his tone almost gentle. "You care about your husband, don't you?" "Yes." "You want him to avoid conviction." "I want the truth to be heard." Kent smiled. "Of course. Now, you married Mr. Voss quite recently, didn't you?" "Yes." "Under somewhat unusual circumstances." Mara's pulse quickened. "We married because we wanted to." "Did you?" Or did you marry to avoid financial penalties the council had levied against Mr. Voss for your improper living arrangement? Garrett objected. Relevance, Your Honor. I'm establishing the witness's credibility, Kent said smoothly. The judge considered. I'll allow it. But tread carefully, Mr. Kent. Kent turned back to Mara. Mrs. Voss, isn't it true that your marriage was a strategic decision designed to circumvent lawful penalties? It was a personal decision. A personal decision that just happened to invalidate charges against Mr. Voss. How convenient. Mara's hands clenched. Our marriage is legal. Legal, yes, but genuine? Kent paused, letting the question hang. Tell me, Mrs. Voss, do you love your husband? The courtroom went silent. Mara felt the weight of every stare, every expectation. If she said yes, they'd demand proof, gestures, history, romance she couldn't manufacture. If she said no, they'd use it as evidence the marriage was fraudulent, that her testimony was worthless. She met Kent's gaze and made a choice. I respect him, she said clearly. I trust him, and I'm committed to our partnership. If that's not love by your definition, I don't care. It's enough for us. Kent's smile widened. So you admit the marriage isn't based on romantic affection. I admit it's based on something stronger. And yet you expect this jury to believe your testimony is unbiased. I expect this jury to recognize that I have no reason to lie. Caleb was home that night. I know because I was there. You can twist that however you want, but it doesn't change the facts. Kent circled closer. Facts, Mrs. Voss, are often colored by loyalty, and you've shown extraordinary loyalty to a man you barely know. Some might call that suspicious. Some might call it decency. The words came out sharper than intended. Kent seized on it. Decency. Is it decent to lie under oath to protect a violent man? Objection! Garrett shot to his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness and assuming facts not in evidence. Sustained. Judge Harrison's tone was firm. Mr. Kent, rephrase or move on. Kent stepped back, his expression satisfied. He'd made his point. No further questions. Mara returned to her seat, her legs barely holding her. Caleb caught her eye, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She'd done her best. Whether it was enough remained to be seen. Garrett called Caleb next. He testified calmly, detailing his whereabouts that night, the work he'd done on the ranch, the timeline that placed him nowhere near Reeves' property. He spoke about the fines, the harassment, the pattern of retaliation. Kent's cross-examination was brutal. He pushed Caleb on his resentment toward the council, his refusal to cooperate with town initiatives, his history of conflict. He painted him as stubborn, combative, someone with motive and temperament for violence. Caleb didn't flinch. He answered every question with steady composure, refusing to be provoked. Mr. Voss, Kent said finally, you expect this jury to believe that Thomas Reeve fabricated this entire attack just to frame you. I expect this jury to see that the evidence doesn't support the charge, Caleb replied, and to question why two witnesses with financial ties to the alleged victim only came forward after my arrest was announced. Kent smiled coldly. Or perhaps they came forward because they witnessed a crime. Perhaps, Caleb said, but I doubt it. Closing arguments came the next morning. Kent delivered a passionate plea for justice, framing Caleb as a dangerous man who'd attacked a respected community leader. Garrett countered with reason and doubt, highlighting the lack of physical evidence, the suspicious timing, the unreliable witnesses. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Mara sat outside the courtroom, unable to eat, unable to think. Garrett paced. Caleb sat motionless, his face unreadable. When the bailiff finally called them back, Mara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The jury filed in, their expressions carefully neutral. The foreman stood, holding a slip of paper. Judge Harrison spoke. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of assault, how do you find the defendant? The foreman's voice was clear. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Shouts of outrage scattered applause. Reeves stood, his face livid, arguing with Kent. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. Mara couldn't breathe. Not guilty. The words didn't seem real. Caleb turned to her, his expression stunned. Garrett clapped him on the shoulder, grinning. The bailiff was already unlocking Caleb's cuffs. You're free to go, mister. Voss, the judge said over the noise, court is adjourned. Mara stood on shaking legs as Caleb walked toward her. When he reached her, she didn't think. She just moved, wrapping her arms around him. He stiffened in surprise, then slowly returned the embrace, his hands settling at her back. "We won," she whispered against his shoulder. "Yeah," Caleb said, his voice rough. "We did." They stood like that for a long moment, the chaos of the courtroom fading into background noise. When they finally pulled apart, Mara saw something in Caleb's eyes she hadn't seen before. Relief, yes, but also something deeper. Gratitude. Trust. Maybe even the beginning of something more. Outside, the afternoon sun was blinding. Mara squinted against it, breathing deeply for the first time in weeks. Garrett joined them on the courthouse steps. "That was closer than I'd like, but a win's a win. They had nothing solid, and the jury saw through it." "What happens now?" Mara asked. "Now you go home, rebuild, and hope the council's learned their lesson." Caleb's expression darkened. "They haven't." "No," Garrett agreed, "but you've proven you can fight them. That matters." He shook Caleb's hand and left. Mara and Caleb stood alone on the steps, the town stretching out before them. "Ready to go home?" Caleb asked. Mara nodded. "More than ready." They climbed into the wagon and Caleb snapped the reins. As they rolled away from Black Ridge, Mara felt the tension of the past weeks begin to loosen. Not gone, never fully gone, but manageable. "Thank you," Caleb said after a while. Mara glanced at him. "For what?" "For not giving up. For staying when you had every reason to leave." "I had every reason to stay," Mara corrected. "You just gave me the opportunity." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "Still, not everyone would have done it. Not everyone had a reason to." They rode in comfortable silence, the ranch appearing on the horizon as the sun began to set. When they finally pulled up to the house, Mara felt something settle inside her, a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. This was home. Imperfect, hard-won, and entirely theirs. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers just a moment longer than necessary. "We should celebrate," Mara said. "Do we have anything that passes for celebratory?" Caleb thought for a moment. "I think there's a bottle of whiskey in the back of the pantry. Been there since my father's time." "Good enough." They went inside together, and Mara found the bottle, dusty and half full. She poured 2 small glasses, handing one to Caleb. "To survival," she said, raising her glass. Caleb clinked his against hers. "To stubbornness. To proving them wrong." "To you," Caleb said quietly. Mara met his gaze, surprised. "Me? You could have walked away a dozen times. You didn't. That takes something most people don't have." "So do you." "Maybe," Caleb drank, wincing at the burn. "But I think we're better together than apart." Mara's chest tightened. "Yeah, I think so too." They finished their drinks in silence, standing in the kitchen that had become theirs through sheer determination. Outside, the night settled over the ranch, quiet and vast. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara felt safe. But safety, she was learning, was never permanent, and the council's defeat in court had only made them more dangerous. 3 days after the verdict, a fire started in the southern pasture. Caleb spotted the smoke from the barn and ran, Mara close behind. They managed to contain it before it spread to the house, but 20 acres of grazing land were destroyed. "This wasn't an accident," Caleb said, staring at the charred earth. "How can you tell?" He pointed to the pattern of the burn. "Started in 3 places at once. Someone set this." Mara's stomach dropped. "Reeve." "Or someone working for him." Caleb's voice was hard. "They can't beat us legally, so they're trying something else." "What do we do?" "We prove it, and we make sure it doesn't happen again." But proving arson was nearly impossible, and both of them knew it. The sheriff came, took notes, and left without making any promises. The insurance adjuster declared the fire accidental, denying their claim. They were on their own. Caleb started sleeping in the barn, keeping watch. Mara reinforced locks, checked fences obsessively. The ranch became a fortress, and they its defenders. 2 weeks passed without incident. Then, late one night, Mara woke to the sound of breaking glass. She grabbed the rifle Caleb had taught her to use and crept into the hallway. Voices, low, male, came from the kitchen. She moved carefully, her heart hammering. 3 men stood inside, their faces covered. One held a torch. Mara raised the rifle, her hands steady despite the terror flooding through her. "Get out." The men froze. One laughed nervously. "Lady, put the gun down before you hurt yourself." "Get out," Mara repeated. "Now." "We're just delivering a message." "I don't want your message. I want you gone." The man with the torch stepped forward. "The message is simple. Leave Blackridge, sell the ranch, disappear. Or next time, we won't stop with just property." Mara's finger moved to the trigger. "You've got 5 seconds. You won't shoot. Try me." Something in her voice must have convinced him. The men exchanged glances, then back toward the broken window. The one with the torch tossed it onto the floor before climbing out. Mara didn't lower the rifle until they were gone. Then she stomped out the torch, her legs shaking violently. Caleb burst through the door moments later, alerted by the noise. He took in the scene, the broken glass, the scorch mark on the floor, Mara standing there with the rifle. "What happened?" Mara told him, her voice surprisingly calm. When she finished, Caleb's expression was murderous. "They came into our home." "Yes." "Threatened you." "Yes." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. "That's it. We're ending this." "How?" He turned to her, his eyes blazing. "By giving them exactly what they don't expect." Mara stared at Caleb, still gripping the rifle. "What do you mean?" "We go back," Caleb said, his voice cold and deliberate. "To Blackridge. To the next town gathering. We show up like nothing happened. Make them face us in public instead of sending cowards in the night." "That's insane. They'll tear us apart." "Maybe. Or maybe they'll realize we're not backing down, no matter what they do." Caleb moved to the window, examining the broken glass. "These men came here to scare you, to make you feel unsafe in your own home. If we hide, they win. If we run, they win. But if we walk back into that town and stand in front of everyone who's tried to destroy us, that's something they can't control." Mara set the rifle down, her hand still trembling. "And what happens when they escalate again? When someone doesn't just break a window?" "Then we make sure the whole town sees who they really are." Caleb turned to face her. "Mara, they've been operating in shadows, rumors, proxy attacks. But if we force them into the light, if we make them confront us face to face, some of those people watching might actually see the truth." "You're assuming people want to see the truth." "I'm assuming some of them do. Anna did. There have to be others." Mara sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. The adrenaline from the confrontation was fading, leaving her hollow and shaking. She looked at the scorch mark on the floor, where the torch had landed, at the broken glass glittering in the lamplight, at Caleb standing there with that stubborn determination that had gotten them both into this mess. "When's the next gathering?" she asked finally. "Harvest Festival, 2 weeks. The same place where this all started." "Exactly." Caleb knelt in front of her, his expression softer now. "I know I'm asking a lot. I know you've already given more than anyone should have to. But I think this is how we end it. Not by fighting their way, but by refusing to disappear." Mara looked at him, really looked at him. There were new lines around his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights spent watching for threats. His hands were rougher than when they'd met, calloused from extra work to compensate for the business they'd lost. He'd aged in these months of fighting, but there was something unbreakable in him that hadn't dimmed. "All right," she said quietly. "We'll go." Relief flickered across Caleb's face. Together. Together. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. When she took it, he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture that was becoming more natural between them. Mara pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and let herself take comfort in his solidity. "We should get some sleep," Caleb murmured against her hair. "Tomorrow we'll board up that window properly and figure out what we're wearing to this damn festival." Mara pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "You're thinking about clothes?" "I'm thinking about armor," Caleb corrected. "If we're walking into battle, we might as well look like we're not ashamed of who we are." A surprised laugh escaped Mara. "When did you become strategic about fashion?" "When I married a seamstress who taught me that appearances matter. whether we like it or not. The next morning brought unexpected company. Mara was sweeping up the last of the broken glass when she heard multiple horses approaching. Her stomach dropped, but when she looked out, she saw Anna riding in front, followed by 3 men Mara didn't recognize. Caleb came out of the barn, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. Anna dismounted quickly, her expression urgent. "We heard what happened last night," she said without preamble. "My brother Joseph talked to some people. These are the Miller brothers. They ranch about 30 miles north. They want to help." The oldest of the 3 men stepped forward, a weathered giant with gray in his beard. "Name's Thomas Miller. That's my brothers, Daniel and Robert. We've had our own troubles with Reeve and his people over the years. Seems like you could use some allies." Caleb studied them warily. "What kind of help are you offering?" "The kind that involves making sure nobody tries burning your place down or threatening your wife while you sleep," Thomas said bluntly. "We'll take turns keeping watch. Post men around the property at night. Make it clear you're not isolated out here." "Why would you do that?" Mara asked. "You don't know us." "Don't have to know you to recognize bullying when we see it," Daniel, the middle brother, spoke up. "Besides, Anna says you're good people. That's enough." Robert, the youngest, added, "And honestly, we're tired of watching Reeve and his cronies run roughshod over anyone who doesn't kiss their boots. About time someone stood up to them. Might as well back the folks with the spine to do it." Caleb glanced at Mara, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. They needed help, and pride was a luxury they couldn't afford anymore. "All right," Caleb said. "We appreciate it, but I can't pay you much." Thomas waved him off. "Didn't ask for payment. Just make sure you show up to that festival and don't let those bastards win. That'll be payment enough." They spent the day reinforcing the ranch's defenses. The Miller brothers helped repair the window with proper boards and glass. They checked fence lines, secured the barn, and established a rotation for night watches. Anna stayed too, helping Mara with chores and talking through what the festival would be like. "It'll be packed," Anna warned, kneading bread dough at the kitchen table. "Everyone comes. It's the social event of the season, which means everyone will see you walk in." "That's the point," Mara said, though her stomach churned at the thought. "Constance will be there. Margaret, Iris, all the women who've made your life hell." "I know." Anna stopped kneading, looking at Mara seriously. "Are you sure about this? Because once you walk through those doors, there's no taking it back. You'll either break through or break completely." Mara's hand stilled on the vegetables she was chopping. "I'm tired of breaking, Anna. I'm tired of being the one who has to bend and compromise and disappear to make other people comfortable. Maybe it's time they got uncomfortable for once." A slow smile spread across Anna's face. "Good. Because I'll be right there with you. And so will Joseph and Catherine. You won't be alone." That night, with Thomas Miller on watch, Mara and Caleb sat together on the porch. The autumn air was crisp, promising the first frost soon. Stars filled the sky, indifferent and eternal. "Tell me about your parents," Mara said suddenly. Caleb looked at her, surprised. "Why?" "Because I realized I don't know. I know what happened to the ranch, but not really who they were." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "My father was stubborn, proud, thought asking for help was weakness. When my mother got sick, he tried to handle everything himself. The medical bills, the ranch work, caring for her. By the time he finally admitted he needed help, it was too late. The debts were too big. The bank had already started foreclosure proceedings." "What was she like?" "Your mother?" "Kind. Too kind sometimes. She'd feed anyone who showed up hungry, even when we barely had enough ourselves. She saw the good in people, even when they didn't deserve it." Caleb's voice roughened. "She hated conflict, would have been horrified by everything we're doing now." "Would she have been wrong?" "Maybe. Probably." Caleb exhaled slowly. "But her kindness got exploited. People took advantage because they knew she'd never push back. And my father's pride kept him from building the alliances that might have saved them. I learned from both their mistakes." Mara reached for his hand. "You think what we're doing is different?" "I think we're fighting back, but we're also accepting help. That's the balance they never found." He squeezed her fingers. "And we're doing it together. That makes all the difference." The 2 weeks before the festival crawled by with agonizing slowness. The Miller brothers kept their word, maintaining a rotating watch that let Mara and Caleb sleep without fear of midnight attacks. No more incidents occurred, but the tension remained, a storm-gathering force just beyond the horizon. Mara spent her evenings sewing, not just for herself, but for Anna and Catherine too. If they were making a statement, they'd do it right. She worked by lamplight, her fingers moving with practiced precision, creating dresses that were elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful but not apologetic. For herself, she chose dark blue fabric, deep as midnight, with subtle embroidery at the collar and cuffs. The fit was perfect, the lines clean. It was a dress that said she knew her worth and wouldn't diminish it to make others comfortable. Caleb watched her work one evening, leaning against the doorframe. "You're good at that." "I've had practice." "No, I mean, you're really good. That dress looks like something you'd see in a city shop. Expensive." Mara didn't look up from her stitching. "I used to dream about having my own shop. Before. When I thought things like that were possible." "They still are." "Maybe." She tied off a thread, examining her work. "After we survive the festival, we can talk about dreams." "Deal." 3 days before the festival, James Garrett appeared at the ranch with news that changed everything. "I need to show you something," he said, spreading documents across the kitchen table. "I've been investigating Thomas Reeves' business dealings, the railroad contracts specifically." Caleb and Mara leaned over the papers. Contracts, financial records, correspondence. "What are we looking at?" Caleb asked. "Fraud, embezzlement, corruption." Garrett pointed to specific entries. "Reeves' been using his position on the town council to award contracts to companies he secretly owns. He inflates the costs, the town pays, and the money flows back to him through shell corporations. It's been going on for at least 5 years. Mara's eyes widened. "How much money?" "Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. I haven't finished tracing all the connections yet." "Why are you telling us this?" Caleb asked carefully. Garrett looked up, his expression serious. "Because you have a choice to make. I can take this to the county prosecutor. It's enough to warrant an investigation, possibly criminal charges. But if I do, it'll blow up in Reeves' face right around the time of the Harvest Festival. The timing might work in your favor, or it might make things worse. He'd know this came from you." "It didn't come from us," Mara pointed out. "No, but he'll assume it did. And a cornered animal is dangerous." Caleb studied the documents, his jaw tight. "How long would an investigation take?" "Weeks, maybe months, but once it's official, Reeves' power starts crumbling. People will distance themselves. The council will have to suspend him pending the outcome." "Do it," Caleb said. "Caleb," Mara started. "No." He looked at her. "This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. How many other people has he hurt? How many others has he pushed around because no one could stop him? If we have the ability to end that, we should." Garrett gathered the papers. "I'll file everything tomorrow morning. By the time of the festival, the news will be spreading. Be prepared for backlash." After he left, Mara paced the kitchen. "This is going to make the festival even more volatile." "I know. Reeve will be desperate. Desperate people do stupid things." "I know that too." Caleb caught her hand, stopping her pacing. "But we can't let him keep destroying lives just because we're afraid of what he'll do when he's caught. That's how men like him stay in power." Mara wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. She hated that he was right, but he was. "Fine," she said. "But we're taking precautions. The Miller brothers come with us. We don't go anywhere alone, and if things get violent, we leave. Immediately. Agreed?" "Agreed." The morning of the Harvest Festival dawned clear and cold. Mara dressed carefully, her hands steadier than she expected. The blue dress fit perfectly, making her look dignified and unafraid. She pinned her hair up, applied a touch of color to her lips, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was unrecognizable from the frightened seamstress who'd attended last year's ball in a borrowed dress. This woman looked like she could face down an army. Good. Because that's essentially what she was about to do. Caleb was waiting in the main room, wearing his suit. He'd trimmed his beard, combed his hair, and looked almost uncomfortable with the formality. But when he saw Mara, his expression shifted to something close to awe. "You look—" He stopped, searching for words. "You look like you could conquer the world." "I'll settle for conquering one small-minded town." The Miller brothers arrived with Anna and her family. Joseph looked solemn in a dark suit. Catherine had borrowed one of Mara's dresses and looked beautiful in the deep green fabric. Anna wore burgundy, her chin lifted defiantly. "Ready?" Thomas Miller asked. "As we'll ever be," Caleb replied. They took 3 wagons. The Miller brothers led the way, followed by Caleb and Mara, with Joseph's family bringing up the rear. As they approached Blackridge, Mara could see other wagons and horses converging on the town. The harvest festival drew people from surrounding areas, farmers, ranchers, merchants. It would be packed. News of Reeves' impending investigation had indeed spread. They heard whispers as they passed other travelers, saw people pointing and talking urgently. By the time they reached the community hall, the entire town was buzzing with rumors and speculation. The Miller brothers positioned themselves strategically, Thomas near the entrance, Daniel by the refreshment tables, Robert near the back exit. Joseph stayed close to Caleb and Mara, his size and serious expression discouraging anyone from getting too close. When Mara and Caleb entered the hall, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped mid-word. The musicians faltered. Every head turned toward them, expressions ranging from shock to fury to something that might have been admiration. Constance Reeves stood near the front, her face going through a remarkable transformation, pale, then red, then purple with rage. Margaret Holt whispered urgently to Iris Langford. Mayor Whitlock looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And there, in the corner, stood Thomas Reeve himself. His expression was cold and controlled, but Mara could see the fury burning beneath the surface. He knew. He knew they were behind the investigation. Mara forced herself to keep walking, her hand tight in Caleb's. They moved through the crowd, which parted reluctantly, people pressing back as if contact might contaminate them. Anna and Catherine flanked them, creating a protective barrier. Joseph stayed a step behind, watchful and ready. They claimed a table near the center of the room, not hiding in the corners or the back, right there where everyone could see them. Anna's family joined them, and the Miller brothers formed a loose perimeter around their group. The musicians started playing again, tentative and uncertain. A few brave couples moved onto the dance floor, but most people remained in clusters, watching and whispering. Thomas Reeve made his move within 10 minutes. He approached their table with Mayor Whitlock and 2 other council members trailing behind. His face was composed, but his eyes were ice. "Voss," he said coldly, "quite bold of you to show your face here after the lies you've been spreading." Caleb stood slowly, deliberately. "I haven't spread any lies." "No? Then how do you explain the vicious accusations being leveled against me? The investigation into my business dealings? Surely you had nothing to do with that." I didn't make the accusations. The documents did." Reeves' jaw tightened. "Documents can be forged, manipulated by people with grudges and malicious intent." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Mara said, surprising herself by speaking. "If the documents are forged, an investigation will prove it." Reeves' gaze snapped to her, contemptuous and dismissive. "You've taught her to speak, I see. How progressive." "She doesn't need teaching," Caleb said, his voice dropping dangerously low. "And you don't get to talk to her like that. I'll talk however I please in my own town." "It's not your town," Anna spoke up, her voice carrying. "It belongs to everyone who lives here. You just forgot that." Reeves' face flushed. "Mrs. Pritchard, I'm disappointed to see you've aligned yourself with these troublemakers, after everything this community has done for you." "Everything this community has done?" Anna's laugh was bitter. "You mean like trying to foreclose on my farm after my husband died? Like making me feel worthless because I didn't have a man to protect me? The only person who helped me was Caleb Voss. So yes, I'm aligned with him, proudly." Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd, some disapproving, but others thoughtful. Reeves seemed to realize he was losing control of the narrative. "This is inappropriate," Mayor Whitlock said weakly. "Perhaps we should all calm down and enjoy the festival." "Enjoy the festival?" Caleb's voice rose. "While you all pretend you haven't spent months trying to destroy us? While you ignore the corruption that's been bleeding this town dry? I don't think so." He turned to address the room at large, his voice carrying to every corner. "Most of you know what's been happening. The fines, the false arrest, the attacks on our property. You watched it happen and did nothing. Some of you even participated. And why? Because we had the audacity to refuse the roles you assigned us. The room was dead silent now. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Mara was supposed to be invisible, Caleb continued. Useful when needed, forgotten otherwise. And when I treated her like a human being deserving of respect, you punished us both. You used the law, social pressure, economic warfare, anything you could to force us back into place. This is slander, Reeves started. It's truth, Caleb interrupted, and you all know it. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Keep enabling men like Thomas Reeve who abuse their power? Keep punishing people who don't fit your narrow definitions of acceptable? Or start holding yourselves and your leaders accountable? Mara stood, her heart pounding. I came to the Harvest Ball last year hoping to be included, to be seen. Instead, I was humiliated in front of everyone here. Not one person defended me. Not one. Her gaze swept the room, meeting eyes that quickly looked away. Caleb was the first person in this town to treat me like I mattered. And for that simple act of decency, you tried to destroy him. You tried to destroy both of us. Her voice shook but held firm. Well, we're still here, still standing, and we're not apologizing for surviving your cruelty. Constance Reeve pushed through the crowd, her face twisted with rage. How dare you stand there playing the victim? You manipulated your way into Mr. Voss's life, into his home, into his bed. Watch yourself, Caleb said, his tone deadly quiet. Everyone knows what you are, Constance spat at Mara. A conniving, immoral... That's enough. The voice came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Grant, stepping forward from the crowd. Mrs. Reeve, that's enough. Constance whirled on her. Stay out of this, Eleanor. No. Eleanor's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I stayed out of it last time, when Mara was humiliated at the ball, when she lost her job and her home. I stayed quiet because it was easier, because speaking up would have meant making you angry. But I'm done being quiet. She turned to face the crowd. Everything they're saying is true. We did this. All of us. We let the Reeves and the council bully people because it was convenient. Because as long as someone else was the target, we were safe. Well, I'm ashamed of that. And I'm ashamed of how we've treated these two people who've done nothing but try to live their lives with dignity. Another voice joined hers, a man Mara recognized as the blacksmith. Eleanor's right. I've watched the council play favorites for years, give contracts to their friends, punish anyone who disagreed. It's been corrupt, and we all knew it. That's not true, Mayor Whitlock protested weakly. It is true, someone else called out, and we're tired of it. The room began to fracture. Some people still stood with the Reeves, their expressions hostile and defensive. But others were nodding, whispering among themselves, looking at Mara and Caleb with something like respect. Thomas Reeve held up his hands, trying to regain control. This is all very dramatic, but the fact remains that I am under investigation based on fraudulent documents. Someone orchestrated this attack on my reputation. The documents aren't fraudulent. The new voice came from the entrance. Everyone turned to see James Garrett standing in the doorway, holding a leather folder. I've spent the last 3 weeks verifying every piece of evidence. The contracts are real. The shell companies exist. The money trail is clear. Thomas Reeve has been embezzling from this town for at least 5 years, possibly longer. The room erupted. Shouts of disbelief, demands for explanation. Reeve's face went from red to white. You can't prove any of that, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I already have, Garrett replied calmly. The county prosecutor is filing formal charges tomorrow morning. I came here tonight to deliver this personally. He held up an official-looking document. Thomas Reeve, you're being formally notified of your suspension from the town council pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. You're also barred from participating in any official town business or contracts until this matter is resolved. Reeve lunged forward, but Daniel Miller stepped into his path, massive and immovable. I wouldn't, Daniel said quietly. For a long moment, everything hung in balance. Reeve looked around the room, seeing the shock and growing anger on people's faces. Constance grabbed his arm, pulling him back. We're leaving, she hissed. Now! They pushed through the crowd toward the exit. Some people moved aside willingly. Others did so reluctantly. But no one stopped them. When the doors closed behind the Reeves, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Mayor Whitlock looked stricken. I had no idea about any financial impropriety. If I had known, you knew enough, Caleb said flatly. You knew he was abusing his power. You just chose to look the other way because it benefited you. Whitlock's face crumpled. I'm sorry, I truly am. I should have doesn't help us now, Mara interrupted. What matters is what you do going forward. The mayor nodded weakly and retreated. Garrett approached their table. That went better than expected. Better? Mara's laugh was a little hysterical. That was chaos. Controlled chaos, and now everyone knows the truth. That's what matters. The musicians started playing again, a decision made by someone trying to salvage the evening. Slowly, tentatively, people began to move. Some left, clearly uncomfortable with the revelations. Others stayed, talking in urgent clusters. Eleanor Grant approached Mara, her eyes red. I meant what I said, about being ashamed, about staying quiet when I shouldn't have. Mara looked at her. This woman who'd turned her away months ago, who'd contributed to her suffering through inaction. Part of her wanted to reject the apology, to nurse the hurt and anger. But she was tired of being angry. Thank you for speaking up tonight, Mara said carefully. That took courage. It took too long, Eleanor replied, but I want you to know, if you ever need anything, my door is open, and I'll make sure everyone knows it. She walked away before Mara could respond. Anna squeezed Mara's hand. That was something. It was something, Mara agreed, still not quite believing what had just happened. Caleb stood, offering his hand to Mara. Dance with me? She looked up at him, surprised. Now? Especially now. This is where it started, where I first signed your card. Seems fitting to dance here again. Mara took his hand and they walked to the nearly empty dance floor. The music was a waltz, slower and more melancholic than the bright reels from earlier. As they moved together, Mara became aware of people watching. But this time, the watching felt different. Less predatory, more curious. A few other couples joined them on the floor. First Joseph and Catherine, then Anna dancing with her brother, then others. We survived, Mara whispered. We did more than survive, Caleb said. We changed things. Did we? Or did we just make people uncomfortable for one night? Discomfort is the first step to change. They danced 3 more songs. With each one, more people joined them until the floor was crowded with couples. Not everyone. There were still hostile faces watching from the margins, but enough to signal that something fundamental had shifted. When the music finally stopped, they returned to their table to find a small crowd waiting. People Mara didn't know well, offering awkward apologies and tentative support. A few were clearly performative, trying to distance themselves from the Reeves now that the power had shifted. But others seemed genuine in their remorse. Mara accepted each one with cautious grace, not quite forgiving but willing to see what actions followed the words. Near midnight, they finally left. The Miller brothers escorted them back to the wagons, alert for any last-minute attacks. But none came. The people still at the festival watched them leave with expressions ranging from respect to resentment, but no one tried to stop them. The ride home was quiet, everyone processing the evening's events. When they reached the ranch, the Miller brothers did a final check of the property before heading to their own homes. Anna lingered, hugging Mara tightly. You were magnificent tonight. I was terrified. You were both. Anna pulled back, smiling. That's what made it magnificent. After everyone left, Mara and Caleb stood on the porch, watching the stars. The night was cold, frost already forming on the grass, but neither moved to go inside. What happens now? Mara asked. Now we see if actions match words, Caleb said. If people actually change, or if tonight was just theater. And if they don't change? Then we keep living our lives anyway. We've proven we can survive their worst. Everything else is just noise. Mara leaned against him, exhausted but strangely peaceful. I keep thinking about what you said, about this being where it started. What about it? It started with you choosing me when no one else would. And now... She paused, searching for the right words. Now I'm choosing you. Not because I have to. Not because it's convenient or strategic, but because I want to. Caleb's arms tightened around her. Mara. I love you, she said simply. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe it was all at once. But it's true. And I wanted you to know. For a long moment, Caleb didn't respond. Then he tilted her face up, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I've loved you since the trial, he said quietly. When you stood up there and defended me, even though it would have been easier to lie. When you chose truth over safety. That's when I knew. He kissed her then, not the brief practical kisses they'd shared before, but something deeper, a promise and a claim and a surrender all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. So what do we do now? Mara asked. Caleb smiled, a real smile, rare and genuine. Now we go inside. We lock the doors. And we start living like we actually have a future. We do have a future. Yeah, he said. We do. They went inside together, shutting out the cold and the darkness and the remnants of the battle they'd fought. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the aftermath of Reeves' exposure, the town's adjustment, the slow work of rebuilding trust and community. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. The investigation into Thomas Reeves' corruption moved quickly once the county prosecutor got involved. Within 3 weeks, formal charges were filed: fraud, embezzlement, abuse of public office. The evidence was overwhelming. Reeve tried to fight it, hiring expensive lawyers and calling in favors, but the paper trail was too clear. His trial was set for early spring. In the meantime, his assets were frozen, his businesses placed under third-party management, and his influence in Blackridge evaporated almost overnight. Constance left town before the arraignment, retreating to family in St. Louis. Some said she was divorcing him. Others claimed she was just running from the scandal. Either way, she was gone. The town council was restructured. Mayor Whitlock resigned in disgrace after it became clear he'd known about some of the irregularities and done nothing. A special election was called. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Joseph Pritchard was elected mayor on a platform of transparency and accountability. His first official act was to formally rescind all fines and penalties levied against Caleb and Mara. His second was to establish an independent audit of all town contracts and expenditures from the past decade. The changes weren't universally popular. Some people clung to the old ways, resentful of the disruption, but others embraced the opportunity for renewal. New businesses opened. Young families moved in. The general store that had refused to serve Mara changed ownership and made a point of welcoming everyone. Slowly, cautiously, Blackridge began to transform. Through it all, Mara and Caleb maintained their careful distance from town politics. They'd fought their battle and won. Now they focused on building their life together. The ranch prospered. Caleb expanded the herd, bought additional grazing land, and hired 2 permanent hands to help with the work. Mara's sewing business grew beyond anything she'd imagined. Women from surrounding towns commissioned dresses, quilts, and linens. She had more work than she could handle and started training 2 young women as apprentices. One of them was Sarah, the nervous girl Eleanor Grant had introduced them to at the festival. She proved talented with a needle and grateful for the opportunity. The other was a widow named Helen, whose husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her desperate for income. Mara taught them both with patience and care, remembering what it felt like to be invisible and undervalued. She paid fair wages and treated them with respect. In return, they were loyal and hardworking. The guest room Caleb had mentioned converting became Mara's sewing room, bright and spacious, with large windows and shelves for fabric and supplies. She spent hours there, creating beauty from raw materials, building something entirely her own. Winter came, harsh and unforgiving. But the ranch was prepared. They had food stored, wood chopped, livestock sheltered. The Miller brothers visited occasionally, checking on them and sharing news from their own spread. Anna became a regular presence, often bringing Catherine and the children. They'd have dinner together, the house filling with laughter and conversation. It was the closest thing to family Mara had experienced in years. One particularly cold January evening, Anna stayed late after everyone else had gone. She and Mara sat by the fire while Caleb handled some paperwork in the kitchen. "You look happy," Anna observed. "Different than when I first met you." Mara considered. "I am happy. It's strange. After everything that happened, I didn't think I'd ever feel this way." "That's what winning looks like," Anna said. "Not wealth or status, just peace." Is that what we have? Peace? As close as anyone gets in this world. Mara stared into the flames, thinking about the long journey from that first harvest ball to this moment. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Caleb hadn't signed my dance card that night? Probably nothing good, Anna said honestly. You would have left Blackridge eventually, found work somewhere else, started over. But you wouldn't have had this. She gestured around the warm room. This home, this life, him. No, Mara agreed softly. I wouldn't have. Do you regret any of it? The pain, the fighting, all of it? Mara thought about the question seriously. I regret that it was necessary, that people chose cruelty when they could have chosen kindness. But I don't regret surviving it, or what I became because of it. You became strong. I was always strong. I just didn't know it yet. Anna smiled. There's the woman who faced down Thomas Reeve in a crowded ballroom. That woman was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. You taught me that. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling. Outside, snow fell steadily, blanketing the ranch in white. Spring arrived with the trial. Thomas Reeve stood before a judge and jury, the evidence of his crimes laid bare for everyone to see. The prosecution presented contracts, financial records, testimony from witnesses who'd been too afraid to speak before. Mara and Caleb attended the trial, sitting in the gallery among dozens of other Blackridge residents. The courtroom was packed. People wanted to see the mighty brought low. Reeve's defense crumbled quickly. His lawyers tried to claim the money was legitimate consulting fees, that the shell companies were standard business practice. But the numbers didn't lie. Neither did the pattern of abuse. Contractors paid twice what jobs were worth, funds disappearing into accounts Reeve controlled, projects that never materialized despite full payment. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, the judge sentenced him to 7 years in prison and ordered full restitution of the embezzled funds. Reeve's remaining assets would be sold to repay the town. When the sentence was read, Reeve's face went blank. He didn't protest or argue. He simply stood there as the bailiff placed him in handcuffs and led him away. Mara felt no triumph watching him go, just a quiet sense of closure. The man who'd tried to destroy them had destroyed himself through his own greed and arrogance. Outside the courthouse, reporters from regional newspapers wanted statements. Caleb declined politely but firmly. This wasn't about them. It was about justice finally being served. They returned to the ranch that evening to find a surprise waiting. Eleanor Grant and a group of women from town had left baskets of food on the porch. Bread, preserves, pies, and a note that simply said, "Thank you for your courage." Mara read the note twice, her throat tight. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that what they'd endured mattered. "Think we can forgive them?" Caleb asked, reading over her shoulder. "I think we can try," Mara said. "Forgiveness is harder than fighting, but maybe it's the next step." Summer brought unexpected news. Mara was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but waited to be certain before telling Caleb. When she finally did, his reaction was everything she'd hoped for. Shock, joy, terror, all of it flickering across his face in rapid succession before settling into a smile so genuine it made her heart ache. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hand moving to her still flat stomach. "As sure as I can be. I saw the doctor in Ridgemont yesterday. He confirmed it." Caleb pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her carefully, as if she might break. "We're having a baby. We are. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be a mother. We'll figure it out together." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you. Both of you." Mara laughed, crying at the same time. "We love you too." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer and into fall. Mara continued working, though she scaled back as she grew larger. Her apprentices handled more of the orders while she supervised and managed the business side. Anna was thrilled at the news, immediately beginning to sew baby clothes. Catherine organized the women of town to create a quilt, each square made by a different family, a patchwork representation of the community that had once rejected Mara, but now, tentatively, welcomed her. When the quilt was presented at a small gathering in October, Mara ran her hands over the intricate stitching, seeing familiar names embroidered in the corners. Eleanor Grant, the Miller family, Anna and Joseph, even a few people she'd never spoken to, offering their contribution as a gesture of inclusion. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely moved. "It's for the baby," Eleanor explained, "to wrap them in love from the start, so they never feel unwelcome the way you did." It was the closest Eleanor had come to acknowledging the full weight of what had happened. Mara accepted it with grace. The second harvest festival since their confrontation arrived. This time they attended without fear or strategic planning. They simply went as members of the community, celebrating the season. The atmosphere was markedly different from previous years. The oppressive social hierarchy had loosened. People mixed more freely, conversations flowing across class and status lines that used to be rigid. When the dancing started, Caleb immediately claimed Mara's hand, though her swollen belly made waltzing slightly comical. They laughed through it, moving carefully, surrounded by other couples who smiled indulgently. Halfway through the evening, Mayor Joseph Pritchard called for attention. "Before we continue," he said, standing on the small stage where musicians usually played, "I want to take a moment to acknowledge two people in this room. A year ago, Mara and Caleb Voss stood in this very hall and called us to account for our failures. They showed us what courage looks like, what integrity looks like, and they did it despite knowing the cost." The room had gone quiet, everyone listening. Because of them, we uncovered corruption that had been bleeding our town for years. Because of them, we started asking hard questions about who we are and what we value. They didn't ask to be heroes, they just refused to be victims. And that made all the difference. He raised his glass. "To Mara and Caleb Voss, may we all have half their spine and twice their grace." The room erupted in applause. Mara felt tears streaming down her face, happy tears this time. Caleb's hand found hers, squeezing tight. When the applause finally died down, the music started again. But before they could return to dancing, people approached, dozens of them, wanting to shake hands, offer congratulations, share their own stories of how speaking up had changed their lives too. It was overwhelming and exhausting and absolutely perfect. They left early, both tired but content. The drive home was peaceful, the autumn moon bright overhead. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" Mara asked. "Before all this? When it was just you and the ranch?" Caleb thought about it. "Sometimes, but then I remember how lonely quiet can be. I'd rather have the noise." "Even when the noise includes town politics and public attention?" "Even then. Because the noise means we're not fighting anymore, we're just living." Mara rested her head on his shoulder. "I can live with that." Winter came again, and with it, the baby. Mara went into labor on a bitterly cold February night, snow falling thick outside the windows. Caleb rode for the doctor while Anna stayed with Mara, coaching her through contractions and offering reassurance. The labor was long and difficult. Mara screamed, cried, cursed Caleb for doing this to her. Anna held her hand through all of it, murmuring encouragement. When the doctor finally arrived, things moved quickly. Mara pushed with everything she had, certain she was going to die, certain the pain would never end. And then it did. A thin, wavering cry filled the room. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing the tiny, squirming baby on Mara's chest. Mara looked down at her daughter, red-faced, furious, absolutely perfect, and felt something shift in her chest, a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. Caleb stumbled into the room moments later, having returned from putting away the horses. He froze when he saw Mara holding the baby, his eyes going wide. "Come meet your daughter," Mara said softly. He approached slowly, almost reverently. When he was close enough, Mara shifted the baby so he could see her clearly. "She's so small," Caleb whispered. "She's perfect. She looks like you. She looks like herself." Caleb reached out tentatively, touching one tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his, gripping tight. His face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Hello, little one," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm your father, and I promise I'll do better by you than the world did by your mother." Mara reached up, cupping his face. "We both will." They named her Grace, for the grace they'd found in each other, for the grace they'd been denied and fought to claim, for the grace they hoped to give their daughter from her very first breath. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch. Caleb hired additional help so he could spend more time with Mara and Grace. The apprentices took over most of the sewing business, with Mara supervising from home. Life settled into new rhythms, feeding schedules, diaper changes, sleepless nights punctuated by Grace's cries. It was exhausting and chaotic, and nothing like the quiet life they'd built before. It was also perfect. Anna visited frequently, bringing her children to play. Catherine taught Mara the skills of motherhood that books couldn't convey. The Miller brothers became honorary uncles, showing up periodically with hand-carved toys and uncomfortable attempts at baby talk that made everyone laugh. The town continued to change. New families arrived, drawn by Black Ridge's growing reputation for fairness and opportunity. The railroad came through, bringing commerce and connection to the wider world. Businesses thrived. Schools improved. The rigid social structures that had once defined everything loosened further. It wasn't perfect. Prejudices didn't disappear overnight. There were still people who clung to the old ways, who resented the changes. But their power was broken, their grip on the community's throat finally released. One afternoon in late spring, Mara sat on the porch with Grace sleeping in her arms. Caleb was out checking fences. The apprentices were working in the sewing room, and the world was green and alive with possibility. She thought back to that harvest ball, to the woman she'd been, sitting alone in her ugly dress, accepting humiliation as her due. That woman had believed she deserved nothing more than scraps and silence. She'd been wrong. Everyone who'd told her she was worthless, that she should be grateful for whatever crumbs of acceptance they deigned to offer, that she had no right to dignity or choice, they'd all been wrong. And proving them wrong had cost everything. Her safety, her security, nearly her life. But it had also given her everything that mattered. A home, a family, a sense of self-worth that no one could take away. Grace stirred, making soft, sleeping sounds. Mara looked down at her daughter's face and felt that fierce love surge again. "You won't have to fight the way I did," she murmured. "Your father and I already fought that battle. You'll have choices, opportunities, respect. You'll know from your first breath that you matter." The baby slept on, unaware of the promise being made. Caleb appeared around the corner of the house, saw them on the porch, and smiled. He climbed the steps, settling beside Mara on the bench they'd built together last summer. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Everything's perfect." He put his arm around her shoulders, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. They sat like that for a long while, watching the sun move across the sky, listening to the sounds of their land and their life. "Do you ever regret it?" Mara asked. "That first dance? Everything that came after?" "Never. Not even the hard parts?" "Especially not the hard parts," Caleb said. "The hard parts made us who we are." Mara leaned into him. "Who are we?" "People who choose each other, every day, no matter what." "I like that answer." "Good, because you're stuck with it." Grace woke then, beginning to fuss. Caleb took her gently, cradling her against his chest and standing to walk her around the porch. His low voice rumbled as he talked to her, telling her about the ranch, the animals, the life she'd grow up in. Mara watched them, her husband and her daughter, and felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. Years later, when Grace was old enough to understand, Mara would tell her the story. About the harvest ball and the dance card, about choosing courage over comfort, about a town that needed to learn hard lessons, and two people who refused to teach them gently. She'd tell her daughter that fairness isn't given, it's demanded. That dignity isn't granted, it's claimed. That belonging doesn't come from making yourself small enough to fit into spaces that don't want you. It comes from building your own space and inviting in the people worthy of sharing it. She'd tell her that love, real love, isn't about perfect people making perfect choices. It's about flawed people choosing each other anyway, through the mess and the pain and the impossible moments. And she'd tell her the most important thing of all, that she, Grace, was born from defiance, from the audacity of two people who refused to accept that some lives mattered less than others. That was her inheritance, not money or land or social standing, but the knowledge that she came from people who fought for their right to exist with dignity. And that was worth more than anything else in the world. The sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the house, lamps were lit. Dinner was prepared. The day's work was done. Mara and Caleb sat together on the porch, Grace between them, and watched the stars emerge one by one. They'd won their battle, not through violence or vengeance, but through stubborn refusal to disappear. Through choosing each other when the world demanded they choose shame. And now they had this: peace earned through struggle, love forged in fire, a family built on the foundation of mutual respect and unwavering support. It wasn't the life either of them had planned. It was better.